I sent a single photo to our family group chat showing my 7-year-old daughter pale and fragile after life-saving open-heart surgery. She wants to see you. I typed, my hands still trembling slightly from the sheer terror of the past 12 hours in the waiting room. My older brother Jamal replied almost instantly. Busy, handle it. My mother Valerie chimed in a minute later. She lived. Stop making her our problem. I stared at the glowing screen for a long moment and typed two simple words. It is okay. They had absolutely no idea that at 11 tonight, the entire country would watch their carefully crafted elite empire burn to the ground on live television. The rhythmic, steady beeping of the intensive care monitor filled the sterile room. Layla lay perfectly still in the oversized hospital bed, her small chest wrapped in thick white bandages. I held my phone over her, capturing the stark reality of her survival before hitting send to the Caldwell family chat. A minute passed. The fluorescent lights overhead hummed a dull, clinical tune. My phone vibrated against my palm. Jamal. Busy. Handle it. I swallowed the dry lump in my throat. Another buzz followed immediately. Mom. She lived. Stop making her our problem. I looked from the glowing screen to my sleeping daughter. They were attending the annual Caldwell Hope Gala tonight, mingling with the Atlanta elite, pouring champagne and securing their status as philanthropic royalty. Layla fighting for every single breath was just an inconvenience to their packed social schedule. I typed back, "It is okay." I hit send and slipped the phone into my pocket. No tears fell. I ran out of tears for these people years ago when they first showed me exactly who they really were. The heavy wooden door creaked open, and a nurse walked in, checking the intravenous drip. She glanced at my faded gray college hoodie and my worn-out sneakers. Her eyes softened with that familiar condescending pity reserved for struggling single mothers in the charity ward. "You should get some rest, honey," she whispered, offering a sad, sympathetic smile. "The billing department can set up a payment plan for all of this when you are ready. Do not let the financial stress break you down." I did not correct her. I did not tell her I had already paid the lead surgeon in full hours ago. I just nodded and thanked her quietly. She walked out, leaving me alone again. I reached into my battered canvas tote bag and pulled out a matte black laptop. It was not a standard consumer model. It was a heavy military-grade encrypted terminal issued only to senior forensic auditors at the Securities and Exchange Commission. I opened the lid. The biometric scanner flashed green, recognizing my retina instantly. The dark screen illuminated my face, displaying layers of complex financial routing data, offshore shell accounts, and hidden corporate ledgers. My family thought I was a failure, a dropout, who ruined her life with a teenage pregnancy. They thought they had left me behind in the dirt while they climbed to the absolute top of high society. They loved performing their black excellence routine for the cameras, masking their extreme greed. A sharp ping interrupted the silent scrolling of data on my screen. An Instagram notification popped up in the top right corner. "Heather is live." I clicked the alert. The screen expanded to show my sister-in-law, Heather. She stood on a brilliant red carpet surrounded by flashing camera bulbs. She wore a custom $15,000 emerald gown, her blonde hair styled in perfect cascading waves. She was the picture of white savior elegance, married into an affluent black family, basking in the glow of charitable praise. A reporter shoved a microphone toward her smiling face. "Heather, you and Jamal have raised millions tonight for pediatric care," the reporter gushed. "What inspires this incredible generosity?" Heather placed a manicured hand over her heart, her eyes shining with perfectly manufactured tears. "It is deeply personal to us," she said, her voice trembling with practiced emotion. "My husband Jamal and I are completely funding the medical care for his precious little niece. Her mother is a single parent struggling to get by in a very bad neighborhood. We just could not let that poor child suffer because of her mother's massive financial failures and severe lack of education. We are covering every single hospital bill out of our own pockets. We firmly believe in lifting up our community when they simply cannot lift themselves." I watched her lie flawlessly to thousands of viewers. I looked down at the hospital billing receipt sitting next to my laptop on the tray table. The receipt showed a balance of exactly zero paid entirely from my personal trust fund. Jamal and Heather had not contributed a single dime to Layla's surgery. They were using my daughter's brutal fight for life as a marketing tool to solicit massive donations from wealthy investors. Donations that would never reach a hospital or any sick child. Donations that went straight into their offshore accounts to fund their luxury cars, designer clothes, and fake elite lifestyle. My mother Valerie stepped into the camera frame, hugging Heather tightly. Valerie wore diamond earrings that cost more than a standard college tuition. "We are so blessed to have Heather in our family," Valerie announced proudly to the cameras. "She brings such grace and charity to our lives. We take care of our own, even those who have lost their way and made terrible life choices." I closed the Instagram window. The anger in my chest crystallized into cold, pure focus. I pulled up the federal auditing software interface. I typed in the primary tax identification number for the Caldwell Hope Gala. The screen populated with dozens of bank accounts spanning from Atlanta to the Cayman Islands. I highlighted every single routing number associated with my brother. I moved my cursor over the bright red command button labeled Initiate Asset Freeze. My family wanted to pretend I was a helpless burden. They wanted to use my sick child to line their pockets while treating us like garbage. They forgot one crucial detail tonight. You should never fake a charity when your sister is the lead federal auditor investigating your financial fraud. I pressed enter. The soft click of the enter key felt heavier than anything I had ever done. The federal auditing terminal confirmed the asset freeze with a bright green banner across the screen, locking away millions of dollars of fake charity funds. I took a slow breath, letting the cool air of the intensive care unit fill my lungs. I was finally fighting back. But before I could even close the laptop, a loud commotion erupted in the hallway outside my daughter's room. Heavy footsteps stomped against the linoleum floor, accompanied by a voice I had prayed I would never have to hear again. "Well, well, well, look who is pretending to be Mother of the Year," the voice boomed, shattering the quiet sanctuary of the pediatric cardiology ward. I turned around and saw DeAndre pushing his way through the heavy wooden door. My ex-husband had not bothered to see Layla since the day she was diagnosed with her severe heart condition 4 years ago. He claimed he could not handle the emotional stress of a sick child and walked out, leaving me with mounting medical bills and a completely broken heart. Now here he was standing in the doorway, wearing a flashy gray suit that smelled strongly of cheap cologne and stale liquor. A short, balding man holding a thick leather briefcase stood right behind him, wiping nervous sweat from his forehead. "You need to pack your things," Maya DeAndre said, pointing an accusatory finger at me as he strutted into the room. "I am taking over from here." I stood up and moved deliberately between him and my daughter's bed, shielding my sleeping child from his deeply toxic presence. "Keep your voice down," I whispered sharply. "She just got out of open-heart surgery." DeAndre scoffed and crossed his arms, looking around the sterile medical room with complete disgust. The balding man stepped forward, clearing his throat loudly. "My name is Arthur Vance and I represent Mr. DeAndre here," the man said, his tone dripping with an unearned sense of elite authority. "We are here to officially serve you with an emergency medical custody petition. My client is asserting his rights as the biological father to take full control of the minor child's medical and financial decisions moving forward." I stared at the two of them, processing the sheer absurdity of their arrogant demand. DeAndre had never paid a single month of child support in his entire life. He did not even know Layla's middle name or what medications she was severely allergic to. Yet suddenly he was standing in a hospital demanding total control over her existence. "You have got to be kidding me," I said, keeping my voice dangerously low. "You have not seen her in 4 years, DeAndre. You do not get to just walk in here and play dad because you feel like making a scene today." DeAndre laughed, a harsh, ugly sound that echoed off the bare hospital walls. "I am not playing anything, Maya," he smirked, taking a menacing step closer to me. "Your brother Jamal reached out to me today. He told me how much you are struggling on your own. He told me you are completely broke and cannot afford any of these fancy hospital bills. Jamal is a truly good man. He actually cares about this family, unlike you. He gave me $20,000 just to get my life together, so I can step up and be the strong man Layla needs right now. He is setting up a special charity fund in my name to manage all the generous donations for her long recovery. The missing piece of Jamal's massive puzzle suddenly fell perfectly into place within my mind. My brother was not just hosting a fake gala to steal from wealthy investors. He desperately needed a legal loophole to access the funds without raising massive suspicion from the Internal Revenue Service. Since I was Layla's sole legal guardian, he could not route the charity money through my name because he knew I would absolutely never participate in his disgusting fraud. So he found the one person desperate and greedy enough to do it. He bought my deadbeat ex-husband for a miserable $20,000. DeAndre was going to sign over the medical custody rights to Jamal's shell company, allowing my brother to funnel millions of dollars through Layla's stolen identity. "You really are an absolute fool, DeAndre," I said, letting a cold, calculated calm wash over my entire body. "Jamal did not give you $20,000 because he cares about you or your sick daughter. He paid you to be the ultimate fall guy for a massive federal financial crime." DeAndre rolled his eyes and looked back at his lawyer. "See what I have had to deal with, Arthur," he complained, gesturing wildly toward me. "She has always been completely crazy, always playing the pathetic victim. She is just a bitter college dropout who lives in a tiny apartment and resents anyone who is actually successful in the real world. You have absolutely nothing, Maya. You have no money, no power, and no lawyers. You cannot fight this legal petition. Just sign the papers and get out of my way before I have Arthur here bury you in crushing legal fees for the rest of your miserable life." The lawyer. Arthur pulled a thick stack of legal documents from his briefcase and held them out toward me with a smug, satisfied grin on his face. "Sign the documents, Miss Washington," he insisted. "It is the absolute best thing for the child. Her uncle has substantial financial resources to provide her with elite medical care, and my client is ready to manage the administrative side of things. Do not make this harder than it has to be for everyone involved." I did not take the papers from his hands. I did not yell or scream or cry like they expected me to. I simply turned around and walked over to my battered canvas tote bag resting on the small visitor chair in the corner. I reached inside and pulled out a thick, heavy manila folder. "Let us take this conversation to the waiting room table outside," I instructed, walking past them without waiting for an answer. "We are not doing this in front of my sleeping daughter." DeAndre and his lawyer exchanged confused glances, but followed me out into the empty hospital hallway. I sat down at the small circular table near the elevator bank. I dropped the heavy folder onto the surface and opened it slowly. I spread the glossy printed documents out across the table, making sure both men had a perfectly clear view of the contents. DeAndre looked down, and all the arrogant color instantly drained from his face, leaving him completely pale. "These are satellite photographs taken exactly 48 hours ago at an illegal offshore gambling ring in the Bahamas." I stated, my voice smooth and fiercely professional. "And right here in the center of this photograph is you, DeAndre, sitting at a high-stakes poker table surrounded by criminals. The man sitting directly next to you is a known associate of a dangerous cartel currently under active investigation by the Federal Bureau of Investigation for international money laundering and severe wire fraud." DeAndre started stammering uncontrollably, his hands shaking visibly as he stared at the high-resolution images of himself committing federal crimes. I slid another printed document across the table toward Arthur, the lawyer. "This is a certified wire transfer log." I continued, tapping the brightly highlighted numbers on the page with my index finger. "It shows exactly $20,000 moving from a registered shell company in the Cayman Islands directly into your client's personal checking account at exactly 3 o'clock this afternoon. That offshore shell company is entirely owned and operated by my brother Jamal. The money was transferred across state lines for the explicit criminal purpose of committing massive charity fraud." Arthur swallowed hard, leaning closer to examine the official routing numbers on the government document. I looked directly at the lawyer, locking my eyes with his terrified stare. "Your name is Arthur Vance. Your State Bar Association number is 48291. You are currently acting as a willing accessory to conspiracy wire fraud and the attempted extortion of a senior federal officer. If you leave this hospital right now and never contact me again, I will consider leaving your name out of the official indictment report I am filing at midnight tonight. If you stay and continue to push this fraudulent custody petition, You will be sitting in a federal holding cell before the sun comes up tomorrow morning." Arthur began breathing heavily, clutching his chest. He looked from the undeniable wire transfer logs to the crystal-clear satellite photos, and then slowly up at me. He realized in a fraction of a second that the quiet woman sitting across from him was not a broke, uneducated single mother. He was staring at someone who had total access to classified federal surveillance and global offshore banking records. The lawyer did not say a single word in his defense. He simply dropped his custody papers onto the floor, grabbed his leather briefcase, and literally sprinted down the hallway toward the emergency stairwell, leaving his client completely abandoned and defenseless. DeAndre stood completely frozen, watching his only legal representation run away in absolute terror. He turned slowly back to me, his jaw trembling violently, as he looked at the devastating wire transfer documents still resting on the table. "Maya," he stammered, taking a terrified step backward away from me. "Maya, what is going on here? Who are you working for?" I stacked the highly classified documents back into a neat pile and slid them safely back into my manila folder. "I am the senior federal forensic auditor who just seized the $20,000 you received from Jamal," I told him softly, but with absolute lethal conviction. "You currently have exactly $0 in your bank account, DeAndre. And the federal agents raiding that gambling ring in the Bahamas right now already have your photograph in their hands." Maya stands alone in the sterile hospital corridor, watching the empty emergency stairwell door slowly swing shut behind her terrified ex-husband. She does not waste a single second celebrating the small victory. She walks back into the quiet intensive care unit and sits down beside the humming medical machines. She opens her heavy encrypted laptop again. The federal auditing software is still running silently in the background, processing the massive offshore asset freeze. A red notification blinks rapidly across the top right corner of her digital display. It is an intercepted cellular transmission flagged by the federal surveillance program. The tracking log shows her mother Valerie frantically attempting to call Jamal over and over again. Valerie is trapped in a state of absolute panic because the charity credit cards have just started declining all over the elite gala venue. Maya watches the digital routing trace map light up with rejected transactions. Before she can even process the beautiful reality of their financial destruction, her own personal cell phone begins to vibrate harshly against the metal tray table. The caller identification screen flashes a bright, glaring photograph of her sister-in-law, Heather. Maya picks up the phone and presses the green answer button, holding the device to her ear without saying a word. Heather does not bother offering a polite greeting. Her voice comes through the speaker sharp and dripping with an intense, patronizing superiority. "Listen to me very carefully, Maya," Heather demands, speaking as if she is scolding a disobedient child. "Jamal is currently dealing with a massive banking error with the caterers, and I do not have the time or the patience to deal with your typical ghetto drama tonight. We have billionaires sitting in the grand ballroom waiting to see the updated medical release forms for your sick daughter. You need to log into your email right now and digitally sign over the complete image rights for Layla so we can project her recovery photos onto the main stage. You are actively embarrassing me and my entire family in front of the most important philanthropic investors in Atlanta." Maya remains completely silent, letting the venomous entitlement pour out of the phone speaker. Heather takes her silence as a sign of submission and continues her aggressive rant. "You really have no idea how much I have sacrificed to uplift this family." Heather sighs dramatically, her tone shifting into a deeply offensive white savior complex. "My father gave Jamal the initial seed money to start his charity because we believed in elevating the less fortunate Black community. I married into this family to bring refinement and class to the Washington name. I have spent years trying to polish your brother's rough edges while you just sat around getting knocked up and dropping out of our elite social circle. You are nothing but an ungrateful burden, Maya. We are offering to save your dying child with our hard-earned charity money, and you cannot even be bothered to sign a simple piece of paper." The sheer audacity of her racist delusions hangs heavy in the air. Maya looks through the glass window of the hospital room, staring at her beautiful daughter, who survived open-heart surgery without a single dime of their dirty money. Heather huffs loudly into the receiver, clearly annoyed by the continued silence on the other end of the line. I know you are probably too uneducated to understand how elite charity events work, Heather sneers. But we need those image rights transferred to the Washington Hope Foundation immediately. If you do not open your email and sign that document within the next 5 minutes, I am going to stop playing nice. I am going to make sure you regret crossing me for the rest of your miserable, pathetic life. Maya finally speaks, her voice perfectly level and devoid of any emotion. Is that a threat, Heather? She asks simply. Heather laughs, a high-pitched, cruel sound that echoes through the sterile hospital room. It is a promise, Maya, she snaps viciously. You seem to forget exactly who my family is. My father is a highly influential state senator with powerful connections across the entire child welfare system. I have judges and social workers on my personal speed dial. If you ruin this gala for me tonight, I will personally call the Director of Child Protective Services. I will tell them that you are a completely unfit mother, living in squalor and denying your severely ill child access to elite medical care. I will have a team of state agents raid that hospital room before morning. They will rip her right out of your arms and place her into a wealthy white foster home where she will finally receive proper care away from her toxic environment. You will never see your daughter again, Maya. You will go back to being an invisible nobody living in the slums while I raise your child in a mansion. Now sign the release forms and know your place before I ruin you completely. Maya listens to the entire horrific threat without flinching. She does not raise her voice. She does not scream or cry or beg for mercy. She simply places her phone on speaker and sets it down next to her encrypted military laptop. Her fingers fly across the keyboard, typing a series of highly classified access codes into the federal securities database. She pulls up the exact financial portfolio of Heather's father, the supposedly untouchable state senator. The screen populates with a massive web of active federal indictments, offshore bribery accounts, and illegal campaign finance violations. Maya reads the screen with a cold, satisfied smile. The trap she had carefully laid out months ago was finally snapping shut around every single person who had ever looked down on her. Heather starts yelling into the phone again, demanding an answer. Are you listening to me, you pathetic loser? Heather shrieks. I am giving you one last chance to do the right thing before I make the call to the state director. Maya leans closer to the speakerphone. I am listening. Heather. Maya replies, her tone dropping into a deadly, authoritative whisper. I am listening to a woman who thinks she is untouchable because she was born into dirty political money. But you really should have paid more attention to the financial news today instead of picking out your $15,000 emerald dress. You see, my team at the Federal Bureau has been investigating your father's illegal campaign contributions for the past 8 months. He did not give Jamal seed money out of the goodness of his heart. Your father gave Jamal a registered shell company to actively launder his illegal bribe money through the Washington Hope charity. The line goes completely silent. The heavy breathing on Heather's end stops entirely as the terrifying reality of the situation begins to crash down around her. Maya continues typing, pulling up a secondary window on her terminal. You do not have judges and social workers on speed dial anymore, Heather Maya states with absolute lethal precision. Your family political connections are currently under a massive federal subpoena, Heather. Every single asset tied to your maiden name and your married name was formally seized by the United States government exactly 12 minutes ago. If you do not believe me, I highly suggest you open the banking application on your phone and check your personal trust fund balance right now. Maya can hear the faint sound of frantic tapping through the phone speaker. She waits patiently as Heather logs into her elite banking portal. A sudden sharp gasp of pure, unadulterated horror escapes Heather's throat, followed by a whimpering sound of total disbelief. The millions of dollars she had flaunted her entire life were completely gone, replaced by a glaring red federal seizure notice. Your father is not going to call Child Protective Services. Maya whispers the final crushing blow into the microphone. Your father is currently being escorted out of his political fundraiser in federal handcuffs. And you and Jamal are next. Check your trust fund balance, Heather. Maya reaches out and presses the red button ending the call. She tosses the phone onto the bed and turns back to her glowing laptop, ready to finish the complete destruction of their fraudulent empire. The grand ballroom of the opulent downtown Plaza Hotel buzzed with the manufactured energy of the Atlanta elite. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over dozens of circular tables draped in imported silk linens. A string quartet played a soft classical melody in the corner, providing the perfect sophisticated background noise for the wealthy donors rubbing shoulders and sipping $1,000 bottles of champagne. Jamal stood near the absolute center of the room, perfectly positioned under a spotlight, wearing a custom-tailored velvet tuxedo that hugged his shoulders flawlessly. He held a crystal flute of sparkling wine, laughing loudly at a joke told by a prominent real estate mogul. This was his kingdom. He thrived in this lavish environment, surrounded by people who worshipped his carefully constructed image of philanthropic black excellence. How was the golden child, the highly successful businessman, saving his community one massive charity gala at a time? The reality that his own niece was currently fighting for her life in a sterile hospital room mere miles away did not cross his mind for a single second. He took another sip of his expensive drink, ready to ask the real estate mogul for a massive donation, when a young catering manager approached him tentatively. The catering manager wore a crisp white uniform, but nervous sweat beaded on his forehead as he held a digital payment tablet against his chest. "Excuse me, Mr. Washington," the catering manager whispered, leaning in close so the wealthy donors would not overhear the conversation. "I am so sorry to interrupt your evening, sir, but we need to finalize the payment for the upgraded seafood stations and the premium alcohol service before we begin the dessert course. The total comes to exactly $100,000. Jamal forced a tight, polite smile for the benefit of the billionaire standing next to him. He excused himself smoothly and grabbed the manager by the elbow, steering him violently away from the important guests and toward the heavy velvet curtains near the kitchen entrance. "You are completely incompetent for interrupting me while I am working a major donor," Jamal hissed under his breath, his charming smile vanishing the second they were out of public view. "Hand me the tablet and get out of my sight." The manager swallowed hard and handed over the device. Jamal reached into his tailored jacket pocket and retrieved a heavy solid metal black card tied directly to the Washington Hope charity account. He tapped the metal card proudly against the digital reader, expecting the satisfying beep of approval. The screen processed for a brief moment before flashing a bright red error message. Transaction declined. Jamal frowned, staring at the screen. He let out a sharp, annoyed breath. "Your cheap machine is glitching," he snapped, tapping the heavy card against the reader a second time. The system paused and then flashed the exact same red error message. Declined. Jamal felt a tiny prick of hot irritation at the base of his neck. He quickly shoved the charity card back into his pocket and pulled out his personal platinum bank card. This account held his everyday spending money, funded entirely by the generous donations he skimmed off the top of his philanthropic endeavors. He swiped the platinum card through the magnetic reader with an aggressive flick of his wrist. The digital tablet beeped loudly, producing a bold red error screen. "Insufficient funds. Account frozen." The catering manager shifted his weight nervously, refusing to make eye contact with the furious man standing in front of him. "Sir," the manager whispered, his voice trembling slightly, "we cannot begin the dessert service or pop the final cases of champagne until this invoice is cleared. My boss is insisting on payment right now." Jamal felt his jaw clench so tightly his teeth ground together. He pulled out a sleek silver card linked directly to his hidden offshore shell company in the Cayman Islands. He had never used this card in public before, but he was not going to suffer the humiliation of an unpaid bill in front of the richest people in Atlanta. He inserted the silver chip into the tablet. The processing circles spun on the screen for what felt like an absolute eternity. Then the devastating red banner appeared for the fourth time. "Assets seized by federal order." The carefully crafted mask of a noble, generous community leader instantly dissolved into pure, unadulterated rage. Jamal grabbed the catering manager by the collar of his crisp white uniform and physically dragged him behind the heavy velvet curtains, completely out of sight from the glittering ballroom. He slammed the young man backward against the kitchen doorframe, pinning him there with a terrifying display of physical intimidation. "You listen to me, you worthless bottom feeder!" Jamal growled, his voice dropping into a vicious, threatening register. "Do you have any idea who I am? I am Jamal Washington. I am the face of black excellence in this city. The people sitting in that ballroom right now own half the state, and they eat out of the palm of my hand. I am bringing millions of dollars of elite white charity into this community, while pathetic uneducated losers like you pass out hors d'oeuvres for minimum wage. You are exactly like my miserable failure of a sister. You are nothing but a ghetto leech trying to embarrass a successful man because you are deeply jealous of my wealth and my power. The catering manager kept his hands raised in surrender, terrified by the sudden violent outburst. Jamal leaned in closer, his face contorted in an ugly grimace that completely shattered his handsome philanthropic facade. I could buy and sell your entire catering company with the spare change I keep in my glove compartment. Jamal spat venomously. If you do not walk back out there and serve those desserts immediately, I will make sure you never find employment in this city again. I will destroy your reputation and bankrupt your boss before the sun comes up tomorrow. You are a nobody. You have no power and no money. You do not get to stand in front of me and demand anything. Now fix your stupid broken machine before I ruin your pathetic life. Just as Jamal raised his hand to shove the terrified manager again, his personal cell phone began vibrating frantically in his jacket pocket. It was not a normal incoming call ringtone. It was the specific encrypted alert tone assigned solely to his private wealth manager, stationed in the Cayman Islands. Jamal snatched the phone from his pocket, his chest heaving with arrogant fury. He pointed a threatening finger at the catering manager, signaling him to stay perfectly still. Jamal pressed the phone to his ear, fully prepared to unleash his blinding rage onto the incompetent banker who dared to embarrass him with a declined card. "What the hell is going on with my accounts?" Jamal roared into the receiver, not caring who heard him. "You better fix this technical glitch right now, or I will fly down there and personally fire you." There was no apology on the other end of the line. The wealthy offshore banker was not speaking with his usual calm, deferential tone. Instead, the man sounded completely breathless, as if he was actively hyperventilating while watching his entire career collapse. "Sir," the banker gasped, his voice pitching up in pure terror. "Sir, we did not freeze the accounts. There is no technical glitch on our end." "What are you talking about?" Jamal demanded, his heart suddenly skipping a violent beat as a cold dread began to pool in his stomach. "Fix the accounts right now." "I cannot fix it, Mr. Washington," the banker cried out, bordering on complete hysteria. "We have lost total control of the system. A senior Federal Securities and Exchange Commission auditor just bypassed all our security protocols and permanently locked every single account linked to your name and your charities. They have seized everything, sir. They took it all." The heavy wooden door to the intensive care unit slammed open against the wall, hitting the rubber stopper with a violent thud that made me jump. I quickly closed my encrypted federal laptop and shoved it under my daughter's thin hospital blanket just as my mother, Valerie, stormed into the quiet room. She looked absolutely frantic. The flawless elite matriarch who had been smiling perfectly for the red carpet cameras less than an hour ago was completely gone. Her expensive velvet wrap was slipping off her shoulders, and her heavy diamond earrings swung wildly as she marched straight toward me. She was breathing hard, her chest heaving under her designer gown. Her eyes darted around the sterile medical room before locking onto me with a mixture of desperate panic and pure toxic rage. She did not look at Layla. She did not ask how her granddaughter was recovering from open heart surgery. Her only concern was the collapsing financial empire she had built on a foundation of absolute lies. Valerie marched right up to my small plastic visitor chair and reached into her glittering designer clutch. She pulled out a crisp piece of paper and slapped it down onto the metal tray table right next to my half-empty cup of cold hospital coffee. It was a certified bank check made out to me for exactly $50,000. She slammed her hand down on top of the paper, her long manicured nails tapping aggressively against the surface. "I do not know what kind of sick technological stunt you think you are pulling, Maya," she hissed, her voice trembling with barely contained fury. "But you are going to open whatever cheap computer program you hacked into, and you are going to fix this banking glitch right now." Jamal is standing in a ballroom full of billionaires looking like an absolute fool because the charity cards are suddenly declining. "I know you did this. You have always been obsessed with computers and hacking into things you have no business touching. You are going to take this money, fix the system error you caused, and keep your mouth shut before I have you arrested for cyber terrorism. I stared at the check resting on the metal table. $50,000. Just yesterday, that amount of money would have felt like a miracle. It would have covered a fraction of the mounting medical bills I had been staring at for months while trying to keep my child alive. But right now, it just looked like a pathetic piece of trash. I looked up at my mother, studying the deep lines of stress forming around her mouth. She was terrified, but her massive ego simply would not allow her to believe that her invisible failure of a daughter was actually a senior federal auditor who held her entire financial fate in her hands. She genuinely thought I was just a bitter computer hacker playing a spiteful prank to ruin her special night. She thought she could buy my silence and obedience with a fraction of the millions she and Jamal were actively stealing from sick children across the state. When I did not immediately reach for the check, Valerie let out a frustrated, dramatic sigh that filled the quiet hospital room. You know, I always knew you were a deeply jealous and spiteful girl, Maya, she spat, crossing her arms tightly across her chest. From the time you were a little kid, you could never just be happy for your brother. You always had to ruin his moments because you knew you could never measure up to him in any way. Jamal is the golden boy of this family. I is a prominent businessman doing incredible philanthropic work for the Black community. He carries the Washington name with absolute pride and prestige. And what do? You get knocked up, drop out of our elite social circle, and drag us down with your endless, pathetic struggling. You sit in these depressing charity wards playing the victim while your brother is out there saving our family legacy. She leaned closer to me, her expensive perfume mixing terribly with the sharp smell of hospital antiseptic. Her face was twisted into an ugly mask of pure resentment. Heather told me you threatened to ruin the gala because you are angry. We are getting public recognition for saving your dying kid. Valerie sneered, pointing a sharp finger at my face. You should be down on your knees thanking us for stepping up to help you. We are giving you $50,000 to get your miserable life together. You take this money, Maya. You take it, and you reverse whatever stupid computer virus you uploaded to the banking server. You let your brother do his important work, and you stop trying to destroy the only successful person in this family just because you are a complete and utter failure. The sheer level of psychological manipulation pouring out of her mouth was absolutely staggering. She was actively gaslighting me while standing 2 feet away from my child, who she had refused to visit or support in any real way since the day she was born. She was trying to rewrite reality, painting Jamal as a saint and me as a jealous villain. Years ago, her toxic words would have crushed my spirit. I would have internalized the severe emotional abuse and believed I really was the terrible, ungrateful daughter she claimed I was. But sitting there tonight, watching her desperately try to buy her way out of a massive federal indictment, I felt absolutely nothing but cold professional resolve. She had no power over me anymore. Her cruel words were just the frantic thrashing of a cornered criminal who realized the walls were rapidly closing in around her fake billionaire lifestyle. I slowly reached out and picked up the $50,000 check from the metal tray table. Valerie let out a smug, satisfied breath, assuming I had finally submitted to her relentless bullying. She adjusted her velvet wrap and stood a little taller, a victorious smirk playing on her lips. I told Jamal you just needed a little financial motivation, she bragged proudly, her tone dripping with elite condescension. You have always been so predictable, Maya. Now hurry up and fix the banking error before the donors start asking questions and ruining the entire charity event. I looked at the routing numbers printed along the bottom edge of the crisp bank check. I memorized those exact numbers 3 months ago when I first initiated the federal investigation into Jamal's fake charity network. I held the check up between both of my hands, gripping the thick paper tightly. I looked directly into my mother's eyes, holding her arrogant stare with absolute lethal calm. She was expecting me to thank her, to cry tears of gratitude for her fake generosity. Instead, she found a woman who was perfectly comfortable watching her burn. I am not a hacker, Mom, I whispered, my voice perfectly steady and devoid of any emotion. I am a senior forensic auditor for the United States Securities and Exchange Commission. I did not upload a virus to your banking network tonight. I executed a highly classified federal asset freeze authorized by a federal judge. Valerie's victorious smirk vanished instantly. The color completely drained from her face as my words slowly registered in her panicked mind. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She stared at me as if she was looking at a complete stranger, realizing that the daughter she had abused for decades was the one holding the keys to her destruction. I slowly ripped the $50,000 check perfectly in half. The crisp, tearing sound echoed loudly in the silent hospital room, slicing through the heavy tension. I placed the torn pieces back onto the metal tray table right in front of her trembling hands. This check is directly tied to your offshore Cayman account, I stated coldly, watching the pure, unadulterated horror wash over her features. The exact same account the federal agents are raiding in exactly 10 minutes. I watched the absolute terror paralyze my mother as the pieces of the torn check fluttered down onto the cold metal tray table. Before Valerie could even attempt to formulate a coherent response, the heavy doors to the intensive care unit burst open for a third time tonight. The rhythmic hum of the hospital ward was completely shattered by the sharp, aggressive clicking of designer heels striking the linoleum floor. I looked past my frozen mother and saw Heather marching down the hallway like a woman possessed. The polished, pristine white savior facade she had so carefully maintained for the red carpet cameras was completely gone. Her expensive $15,000 emerald gown was bunched up in her fists, and a noticeable tear ran up the delicate silk hem from where she had likely tripped rushing out of the gala. Her perfect, cascading blonde waves were now a tangled, chaotic mess, falling wildly around her flush face. The diamond necklace resting against her collarbone heaved violently with every erratic breath she took. She looked absolutely deranged, a woman who had just watched her entire elite universe vaporize in the span of 30 minutes. Heather shoved her way past a terrified passing nurse, completely ignoring the hospital rules regarding noise and visiting hours. She stomped right up to where my mother and I were standing, her eyes wide and burning with a toxic, unfiltered hatred. The moment she opened her mouth, every single ounce of her fake philanthropic grace evaporated into the sterile air. "You ruined everything!" Heather screamed, pointing a shaking manicured finger directly at my face. Her voice echoed harshly off the walls, lacking any trace of the gentle, refined tone she used when begging billionaires for charity money. The caterers cut us off, the event planners locked the ballroom doors, and the entire donor list is demanding their money back because every single card in Jamal's wallet was declined. "You did this, you miserable, pathetic ghetto leech." My mother flinched at the volume of Heather's voice, but remained entirely silent, still completely paralyzed by my previous revelation about the federal raid. I stood my ground, keeping my posture perfectly straight and my expression completely blank. I let Heather continue her unhinged rant, knowing that every word she spoke was simply digging her grave much deeper. "You never deserved to be part of this family." Heather spat, her face contorting into an ugly mask of pure aggressive prejudice. "My father brought massive wealth and political class to the Washington name. We gave Jamal a platform to elevate himself above his incredibly trashy roots. We created a sophisticated charity empire to uplift the Black community because people like you are far too lazy and uneducated to do it yourselves. And this is how you repay my family for our elite white charity. You sit in this depressing hospital playing the victim, and you sabotage my husband's massive potential just because you are jealous that I am living in a mansion while you are rotting in the slums. You are nothing but an ungrateful parasite feeding off the success of your betters." The sheer venom in her voice was breathtaking, but it was not surprising to me at all. I had known for years that Heather viewed my family as nothing more than a diversity prop to boost her own political standing. She loved pretending to be a generous savior to the poor Black community while actively harboring deep-seated racist contempt for anyone who actually needed help. She used my daughter's life-threatening medical condition as a convenient tragic storyline to secure wealthy investors for her offshore bank accounts. Now that her fake charity funds were completely frozen, she no longer had any reason to hide her true, incredibly ugly nature. I looked at Heather, taking in her ruined designer dress and her wild, frantic eyes. "Your father did not bring class to this family." "Heather," I stated softly, my voice cutting through her hysterical screaming with absolute calm authority. "Your father brought a massive network of illegal campaign bribes, and a registered shell company designed for international money laundering. And you did not marry my brother to uplift our community. You married him to use his fake philanthropic image as a convenient shield to hide your massive financial crimes from the Internal Revenue Service. Your entire elite existence is nothing but a cheap, pathetic illusion funded by stolen money. Heather let out a high-pitched shriek of pure animalistic rage. The reality that a quiet black single mother was actively destroying her wealthy white dynasty completely broke whatever tiny fraction of sanity she had left. Her eyes darkened with an explosive, violent intent. She lunged forward, closing the short distance between us in a fraction of a second. She raised her hand high into the air, her heavy diamond rings catching the fluorescent hospital lights, fully intending to slap me straight across the face with all the aggressive force she could muster. I did not flinch, and I did not panic. I simply took one precise, calculated step backward, pivoting my body just enough to let her aggressive momentum carry her past me. Heather's hand swung through the empty air, missing my face entirely. Before she could regain her balance or attempt a second strike, two tall figures wearing dark suits stepped seamlessly out of the nearby elevator bay. They moved with terrifying synchronized speed and absolute tactical precision. In the blink of an eye, one of the men grabbed Heather's raised wrist, twisting it firmly behind her back while the other man secured her opposite shoulder. They drove her forcefully forward, pressing her chest and face directly against the cold, hard surface of the hospital corridor wall. Heather let out a shocked, breathless gasp as the impact knocked the wind completely out of her lungs. She started kicking her expensive heels against the linoleum floor, thrashing her body wildly side to side as she tried to break free from their iron grip. "Get your hands off me, you absolute thugs!" Heather screamed at the top of her lungs, her voice cracking with indignant fury. "Do you have any idea who my father is? I will have you fired and thrown in jail for touching me. Let me go right now." The man pinning her right arm did not loosen his grip for a single second. He reached into the inner breast pocket of his dark jacket with his free hand and pulled out a leather wallet. He flipped it open, allowing a heavy gold badge to catch the harsh overhead hospital lights. "Federal Bureau of Investigation." The agent stated, his voice a booming authoritative rumble that instantly silenced the entire hallway. "You are currently being detained for the attempted physical assault of a senior federal officer." Heather immediately stopped thrashing. Her entire body went completely rigid against the wall as the devastating words finally registered in her panicked mind. The loud, aggressive fight instantly drained out of her, leaving her trembling like a frightened animal. The second agent reached onto his tactical belt and produced a heavy pair of metal handcuffs. The sharp, metallic clicking sound echoed loudly through the silent intensive care unit as he secured the steel cuffs tightly around Heather's wrists, right over her expensive imported silk sleeves. My mother Valerie watched the entire brutal takedown with her mouth hanging wide open, unable to process the reality of her wealthy elite daughter-in-law being treated like a common street criminal. I slowly walked over to where Heather was pinned against the wall, looking at the side of her face, pressed awkwardly against the painted plaster. The $15,000 dress, the flawless blonde hair, the fake philanthropic tears, none of it mattered anymore. Her white savior complex had finally collided with the devastating reality of a federal indictment. I leaned in close to her ear, keeping my voice perfectly level and professional. "You should have stayed at the gala, Heather," I whispered softly. "Assaulting a federal agent carries a mandatory minimum sentence in a federal penitentiary. I hear orange jumpsuits are incredibly difficult to accessorize." The agents pulled a sobbing, utterly broken Heather away from the wall and began marching her down the long hospital corridor toward the waiting federal transport vehicles, leaving my mother shivering in the absolute ruins of their shattered dynasty. The echoing thud of the elevator doors sliding shut behind the federal agents left a heavy, suffocating silence in the intensive care corridor. My mother Valerie remained slumped against the cold painted block wall, her knees pulled tightly to her chest as she sobbed uncontrollably over the complete destruction of her elite social standing. I did not offer her a helping hand. I did not offer her a single word of comfort. I simply turned my back on her weeping form and began walking back toward my daughter's room, ready to resume my post beside the humming medical monitors. But before my hand could even touch the cool metal door handle, The sharp, chaotic sound of heavy, frantic footsteps practically tore through the quiet hospital ward. I turned my head slowly, watching as the heavy double doors at the far end of the hallway were violently shoved open. Jamal burst into the corridor, moving like a man who was actively being hunted by invisible predators. His custom-tailored velvet tuxedo jacket was completely ruined, soaked in dark, uncomfortable patches of nervous sweat around the collar and beneath the arms. His usually perfect fade haircut was disheveled, and his imported silk bow tie was hanging loosely around his neck, completely undone. He was breathing heavily, his chest heaving up and down as his wild, panicked eyes darted aggressively up and down the sterile hallway. He had just barely missed seeing his wealthy white wife being dragged away in federal handcuffs, but the sheer raw terror radiating from his entire body told me he already knew his fraudulent charity empire was actively collapsing in real time. Jamal spotted me standing calmly outside the pediatric cardiology suite, and his handsome features contorted into a deeply ugly mask of pure, desperate rage. He marched down the shining linoleum floor, closing the distance between us with aggressive, intimidating strides that were meant to make me cower in fear. Valerie looked up from the dirty floor, her tear-streaked face suddenly brightening with a pathetic, desperate kind of hope. "Jamal," she cried out, her voice cracking as she reached her trembling hands up toward her golden boy. "Jamal, thank God you are here. Maya has completely lost her mind and she brought undercover federal agents to arrest Heather. You have to do something to save our family before we lose absolutely everything." My brother did not even pause to look down at the woman who had spent 35 years worshipping the very ground he walked on. He did not offer his terrified, weeping mother a hand to help her up from the dirty hospital floor. Instead, Jamal roughly shoved Valerie's reaching arms away, brushing past her as if she was nothing more than a piece of garbage blocking his path to me. Valerie let out a wounded, breathless gasp, shrinking back against the wall as the crushing reality finally washed over her. She finally realized that her precious, highly successful son cared absolutely nothing about her well-being or her safety. He only cared about his own money and his own survival. Jamal stopped exactly 2 feet in front of me, towering over my smaller frame and attempting to use his physical size to intimidate me into rapid submission, just like he had done since we were teenagers growing up in Atlanta. "Fix this, Maya," he demanded, his voice trembling with a toxic mixture of raw panic and venomous hatred. "I just got off the phone with my offshore wealth manager, and he told me some rogue federal auditor completely locked down every single account holding my charity funds. I know you are the one behind this pathetic little stunt. You always were a jealous, spiteful loser trying to ruin my life because you could never measure up to my massive success. Log into whatever cheap government system you hacked into and release my money right now, or I swear to God I will destroy you." I kept my posture perfectly straight, maintaining absolute unblinking eye contact with the man who had actively stolen millions of dollars using my sick child's name and medical images. "There is no computer hack to reverse Jamal." I stated, my voice perfectly level and completely devoid of any sisterly affection. "The United States Securities and Exchange Commission has officially seized all your offshore shell companies and illegal banking networks. Your fraudulent charity is completely over, and the Federal Bureau of Investigation is already processing your federal arrest warrants. You have absolutely no power here anymore, and you cannot bully your way out of a federal indictment." Jamal's eyes widened drastically, and a rapid, nervous twitch developed in his jaw as the devastating reality of my words slowly began to penetrate his thick, arrogant skull. The polished, sophisticated businessman persona completely vanished, leaving behind a desperate, cornered criminal who realized he was entirely out of options and out of time. He looked wildly around the empty hospital hallway, searching for any possible leverage he could use to force my hand. His frantic gaze suddenly locked onto the large, transparent glass window of the hospital room right behind me. He stared intently at Layla, lying fragile and pale in her oversized medical bed, hooked up to dozens of life-saving machines and complex breathing monitors. A dark, sickening realization washed over Jamal's face, twisting his features into something truly monstrous and deeply evil. "If you do not pick up your phone and call off your federal agents right this second, I am going to walk into that room and unplug every single machine keeping your miserable kid alive," he hissed, taking a deliberate, threatening step toward the glass door. I will rip the breathing tubes right out of her chest, Maya. I am not going to let a pathetic, ugly college dropout ruin my multi-million-dollar empire just because you are bitterly jealous of my wealth and my elite status. I am the golden child of the Washington family. I am the smart one, the highly successful one, the one who carries our elite legacy on my shoulders, while you are just a trashy embarrassment who got knocked up and ruined her entire life. You are absolutely nothing, Maya. You are a complete failure, and I am not going to let a failure put me in a federal prison. He moved aggressively forward, trying to push past me, fully intending to carry out his horrific, violent threat against a 7-year-old child who was still recovering from open-heart surgery. I did not scream for hospital security, and I did not panic or beg for mercy. I simply stepped smoothly and firmly directly in front of the heavy door handle, physically blocking his path to my daughter with my entire body. The cold, lethal authority radiating from my unyielding stance made him freeze instantly in his tracks. He looked down at me expecting to see fear, but he only found a woman who was perfectly prepared to ruin him forever. I did not drop out of college, Jamal. I whispered, my voice dropping into a deadly razor-sharp register that echoed clearly through the quiet hallway. I kept my mouth shut and let everyone in this family call me an ugly failure because I knew you stole my entire undergraduate tuition fund to buy your very first vintage Porsche. You desperately needed to look like a wealthy, successful entrepreneur for your elite rich friends, so you secretly drained my academic accounts and forced me to leave school in disgrace. But what you never knew was that I had already secured a full academic ride to the Wharton School of Business, based entirely on my own merit and supreme intellect. I spent the last decade building a lethal federal career in forensic accounting while you played pretend on the red carpet, stealing money from sick children. And right now, my federal asset recovery team is actively towing that exact same vintage Porsche out of your luxury garage to help pay off your massive criminal restitution. Jamal's face completely drained of color as my words about his beloved Porsche echoed down the sterile hospital hallway. The realization that his ultimate symbol of wealth was currently being loaded onto a federal tow truck finally broke his arrogant spirit. He stumbled backward away from the glass door of Layla's room, his designer shoes slipping slightly on the polished linoleum floor. He looked like a man who had just been stripped naked in front of the entire world. The polished, sophisticated billionaire persona evaporated, leaving behind nothing but a terrified thief. Down the hall. The elevator doors had not yet opened. The two undercover federal agents were still holding Heather firmly against the wall, waiting for their secure transport to arrive. Heather had heard every single word of my devastating revelation regarding Jamal's stolen tuition money and his seized luxury assets. She stopped fighting against the agent's steel grip and slowly turned her head to look down the corridor at the man she called her husband. The pristine white savior illusion she had paraded around the red carpet was entirely gone. It was replaced by the vicious, aggressive snarl of a cornered animal who realized she had backed the completely wrong horse. "You lied to me, you pathetic fraud!" Heather screamed, her voice echoing off the hospital walls with a terrifying shrillness that made the nurses down the hall jump in alarm. "You told me you were a legitimate businessman with endless philanthropic connections and massive generational wealth. I only married you because my father desperately needed a convenient black charity prop to secure his diversity optics for his upcoming Senate re-election campaign. His political firm was losing massive government contracts because they lacked minority representation, so they bought you to be their smiling token diversity hire. You were supposed to be our perfect untouchable shield against the federal auditors. Instead, you are just a pathetic broke criminal stealing tuition money from your own sick family to buy cheap sports cars." Jamal snapped his head toward his wife, his own panic instantly transforming into a deeply toxic, explosive rage. He marched heavily down the hallway toward the elevator bank, pointing a shaking, aggressive finger directly at Heather's tear-stained face. "Do not you dare stand there and act like some innocent, deceived victim in all of this," Jamal roared, his deep voice cracking under the intense pressure of his collapsing reality. "Your father is not a legitimate politician, Heather, and he never was. He is running a massive illegal Ponzi scheme, disguised as a high-yield real estate investment portfolio." He actively used my charity network to wash millions of dollars of dirty campaign money because his own wealthy white country club investors were starting to ask serious questions about where their quarterly dividends went. Jamal continued his verbal assault, refusing to let her play the innocent white victim. You knew exactly where the money was coming from, and you gladly spent every single dime of it on your disgusting luxury lifestyle while pretending to care about poor black kids on Instagram. You loved playing the generous savior to my family, but you are nothing but a massive criminal parasite feeding off your father's illegal bribes. The sheer volume of their vicious screaming match peaked nervously around the corner of the nursing station. My mother, Valerie, who had been weeping silently on the floor, suddenly scrambled to her feet. Her absolute obsession with high society optics and maintaining her fake elite image completely overrode her basic common sense. She simply could not bear the terrifying thought of her golden son and her wealthy white daughter-in-law exposing their massive criminal enterprise in the middle of a public hospital corridor where anyone could hear them. Valerie rushed toward them, holding her hands up in a desperate, frantic pleading motion. Her expensive velvet wrap was falling off her shoulders, but she did not care. Jamal, Heather, please stop shouting this instant. Valerie begged, her voice trembling as she tried to physically step between the two furious criminals. People are staring at us, and you are actively ruining the prestigious Washington family name. We can call our elite lawyers and fix this terrible little misunderstanding quietly if you just lower your voices and show some class. We are better than this public ghetto behavior. Jamal did not even hesitate. He did not look at the woman who had spent his entire life protecting him, covering up his massive failures, and actively destroying her relationship with her own daughter just to elevate his status. He saw his mother not as a parent, but as a deeply annoying obstacle standing in the way of his blind rage. He simply raised his heavy hand and shoved his own mother violently in the center of her chest. The aggressive physical impact sent Valerie stumbling backward. Her designer heels caught awkwardly on the slick hospital floor, and she collapsed hard against the heavy wooden door of a medical supply closet. She hit the ground with a painful, sickening thud, her expensive dress tearing on the metal door hinge. Jamal did not reach out to help her up. He did not even glance down to see if she was injured. "Get out of my way, you stupid old woman!" Jamal spat, his handsome face contorted into something truly unrecognizable and completely devoid of any human empathy. "This entire mess is your fault anyway, because you could not even control your own pathetic daughter. If you had just kept Maya in line, none of this would be happening to me." Valerie sat on the cold, dirty floor, clutching her bruised shoulder. She stared up at her golden boy with wide, terrified eyes, finally realizing the horrifying truth. She had sacrificed absolutely everything for a selfish monster who would gladly step on her neck to save himself from a federal prison sentence. The devastating heartbreak on her face was absolute and complete. The decades of severe emotional abuse she had inflicted on me to protect him had resulted in her lying broken on a hospital floor, entirely discarded by the son she worshipped. I felt zero pity for her. I simply stood a few feet away, leaning casually against the painted hospital wall, observing their total self-destruction with cold professional detachment. They had spent decades pretending to be a flawless elite family, bonded by massive wealth and unearned superiority. It only took 10 minutes of intense federal pressure for them to completely cannibalize each other, tearing each other's fake masks off in a public hallway. I reached into the pocket of my faded gray hoodie and pulled out my encrypted federal smartphone. I tapped the glowing screen, bringing up the active surveillance interface that had been running silently in the background. I cleared my throat loudly enough to cut through their vicious screaming match, bringing their attention back to the quiet woman they had spent their entire lives underestimating. "Thank you both for the incredibly detailed and fully voluntary confessions." I stated, my voice perfectly level and completely devoid of any emotion. I tapped the bright red recording icon on my digital display, turning the screen around so they could see the active upload progress bar. This entire hospital corridor has been live streaming directly to the secure evidentiary servers at the Securities and Exchange Commission for the last 10 minutes. The glowing screen of my federal terminal displayed multiple live security feeds from the downtown Plaza Hotel ballroom. I sat back in my hard plastic hospital chair, leaving my mother weeping on the floor and my brother completely paralyzed by the reality of his recorded confession. I focused all my attention on the massive digital monitor in front of me, watching my meticulously planned destruction finally execute itself perfectly. Inside the grand ballroom, the atmosphere had shifted from elite sophistication to an uncomfortable buzzing tension. The billionaire donors and wealthy politicians were growing increasingly restless. They sat at their silk-draped tables, staring at empty dessert plates and untouched crystal champagne flutes. The catering staff had completely vanished from the floor following the sudden disappearance of their manager. The string quartet in the corner had stopped playing classical music and were now quietly packing up their expensive instruments, sensing that something was deeply wrong with the event organization. Wealthy guests shifted in their plush seats, checking their designer watches and whispering among themselves. They were waiting for the grand finale of the evening. They were waiting for Heather and Jamal to return to the stage to present the final heartbreaking update on my sick daughter and collect the final round of massive fraudulent donations. But their glamorous hosts were never coming back. At the very front of the magnificent ballroom stood a massive high-definition projector screen spanning nearly 20 feet across the main stage. For the entire night, it had been displaying a carefully edited slideshow of fake charitable missions and stolen images of Layla lying in a hospital bed. The elite donors had wept over those images, pulling out their checkbooks to fund what they believed was a noble pediatric crusade. I moved my fingers across my encrypted keyboard, typing in a final sequence of override commands that bypassed the hotel's audio-visual control room. I took a slow, deep breath and pressed the execute button. On the live security, I watched as the giant projector screen suddenly flickered and went completely black. A heavy, confused silence fell over the entire ballroom as hundreds of wealthy guests turned their heads toward the stage, expecting a technical difficulty announcement. Instead, the dark screen suddenly blazed back to life with a blinding white light. It did not show a charitable foundation logo or a picture of a recovering child. It displayed a highly classified Internal Revenue Service document. It was a complete and uncensored copy of Jamal's offshore banking ledger. A loud murmur rippled through the sea of expensive tuxedos and designer gowns as the elite audience tried to comprehend the complex financial data suddenly glowing right in front of their faces. The ledger clearly displayed the name, Washington Hope Foundation, at the very top of the screen, but the routing numbers beneath it told a completely different story. I had programmed the presentation to slowly scroll through every single illicit transaction Jamal had made over the last 3 years. The donors watched in absolute stunned silence as the screen highlighted a $50,000 withdrawal, specifically labeled as pediatric surgical funds, being directly transferred into a private dealership account to purchase a vintage luxury sports car. The screen transitioned to the next devastating slide, showing a $200,000 charitable grant meant for inner-city youth programs being wired straight to an illegal high-stakes gambling ring in the Bahamas. The collective gasp from the ballroom audience was so loud, the audio feed on my laptop actually peaked. These were incredibly smart, ruthless business people, and it only took them a few seconds to realize they were looking at their own donated money being actively laundered in real time. The projector display did not stop there. I hit another key on my terminal, advancing the presentation to the next phase of their public execution. The screen flashed with official federal wire fraud warrants and scanned copies of Jamal's massive outstanding gambling debts. The detailed documents proved beyond any shadow of a doubt that the so-called face of philanthropic black excellence was nothing more than a desperate degenerate thief drowning in financial ruin. He had systematically targeted the wealthiest citizens of Atlanta, using their desperate need for good public relations to fund his completely fraudulent lifestyle. Men and women who had just written six-figure checks to the Washington Hope Foundation began standing up from their tables, their faces twisting from sophisticated polite confusion into pure, unadulterated outrage. The realization that they had been scammed by a man they considered a close personal friend and an elite peer shattered the polite decorum of the high society event. But the absolute final blow was reserved for Heather. I knew that exposing the financial theft would anger the donors, but I needed to destroy the social foundation that allowed my sister-in-law to operate her toxic white savior complex. I accessed the folder containing the remote data extraction I had performed on Heather's personal cell phone months ago. The giant projector screen above the stage shifted away from the boring financial documents and began broadcasting a series of bright green text message screenshots. These were private, deeply racist conversations between Heather and her wealthy white friends discussing the exact donors sitting in the room right now. The text messages were projected in massive, bold letters for every single person to read clearly. One message mocked a prominent black real estate mogul, calling him a pathetic diversity hire who was too stupid to realize she was just taking his money to buy a new ski chalet in Aspen. Another text thread featured Heather bragging about how easy it was to manipulate the rich black community by throwing on an emerald dress and crying a few fake tears over a sick child she found completely disgusting. The reaction inside the ballroom was instantaneous and violently explosive. The polite whispers and shocked gasps completely vanished, replaced by a deafening roar of absolute fury. The very same people who had been praising Heather's grace and charity just an hour ago were now throwing their expensive champagne glasses at the projector screen. Wealthy politicians and powerful executives began screaming at the empty stage, demanding their money back and furiously dialing their elite legal teams on their cell phones. Chairs were knocked over as dozens of furious donors rushed toward the front of the room, trying to find the event organizers who had completely abandoned the premises. The beautiful, carefully orchestrated gala had officially devolved into a chaotic riot of betrayed billionaires. Women in expensive gowns pushed past each other while men in tailored suits yelled threats of massive lawsuits into the empty air. They were tearing the room apart, desperate to corner Jamal and Heather and drag them out into the street. I watched the panic spread like a wildfire through the security camera feeds. The crowd realized that their hosts had completely fled the building, and their anger quickly shifted toward a desperate need to escape the highly embarrassing situation before the local media arrived. Hundreds of elite guests began surging toward the massive carved wooden double doors at the back of the grand ballroom. They pushed and shoved against each other, abandoning all pretense of high society manners in their frantic rush to exit the fraudulent charity event. But as the first wave of furious donors reached the back of the room and pushed their weight against the heavy brass handles, the doors did not budge. The crowd pushed harder, banging their fists against the polished wood and screaming for the hotel security staff to open the exit. I zoomed in on the external hallway camera feed outside the ballroom. The heavy wooden doors were wrapped tightly in thick industrial steel chains, secured with heavy-duty federal padlocks. The entire elite society of Atlanta was completely trapped inside the room, with the glowing evidence of their own foolishness hovering over them on the massive projector screen. The loud, frantic banging from inside the ballroom echoed uselessly down the empty hotel corridor. I leaned closer to my laptop screen, watching the absolute chaos unfold, with a cold, deeply satisfying calm. And then through the audio feed of the panic-stricken ballroom, the faint but distinct wail of approaching federal police sirens began to echo through the downtown city streets, bleeding through the heavy glass windows of the Plaza Hotel. The wailing of the distant federal sirens cut cleanly through the heavy double-insulated glass of the grand ballroom windows, sending a brand-new shockwave of absolute terror through the trapped crowd of elite billionaires. Inside the intensive care corridor, I did not blink as I stared at the glowing security feed on my encrypted terminal. My brother Jamal had completely vanished from the camera, covering the main stage, his cowardice overriding any lingering sense of responsibility he had toward his wealthy white wife or his massive fraudulent charity. He was running, but I had already meticulously calculated his exact escape route weeks before tonight ever began. 3 miles away, on the dark, empty tarmac of a private municipal airstrip, the sleek, aerodynamic shape of a chartered Gulfstream jet sat waiting with its engines softly whining in the cold night air. The external security cameras mounted along the airstrip chain-link fence transmitted a crystal-clear night vision feed directly to my laptop. I watched as a sleek black luxury sedan sped recklessly onto the restricted runway, tearing across the painted asphalt before slamming on its brakes, mere feet from the waiting aircraft. The passenger door burst open before the car had even completely stopped moving. Jamal scrambled out of the vehicle, clutching a heavy black leather duffel bag tightly against his chest. His velvet tuxedo was completely ruined, torn at the shoulder from where he had likely shoved a panicked donor out of his way while fleeing the hotel. He stumbled slightly on the dark pavement, his expensive designer shoes slipping on a patch of wet oil, but he quickly regained his balance and sprinted desperately toward the glowing stairs of the private jet. Standing at the very top of the aircraft stairs was a tall man wearing a crisp white pilot's uniform holding a digital flight tablet. Jamal practically threw himself up the metal steps, gasping for air as he reached the top. "Start the engines and get us in the air right now," Jamal ordered, his voice cracking with panicked aggression. "Do not wait for tower clearance, just fly the damn plane." The pilot did not move a single inch. He stood perfectly still, blocking the narrow entrance to the luxurious cabin. Jamal slammed his hand against the side of the fuselage, his arrogant entitlement flaring up despite his desperate situation. "Did you hear me, you idiot?" Jamal screamed, shoving his hand into his pocket to retrieve a sleek black hardware wallet. "I am paying you $300,000 in untraceable cryptocurrency to fly me directly to Dubai. My stupid sister might have locked down my primary offshore accounts, but she completely missed my hidden crypto reserves. Now move out of my way before I find someone else to fly this jet." I sat in the quiet hospital corridor and reached forward, pressing a specific key sequence on my encrypted terminal. A hidden microphone mounted inside the aircraft cabin activated, instantly feeding the audio directly into my earpiece. I listened with cold satisfaction as the pilot slowly lowered his digital flight tablet. The man did not look intimidated by Jamal's wealth or his aggressive demands. He simply reached up and unbuttoned the top two buttons of his crisp white pilot's jacket, pulling the fabric aside to reveal a heavy tactical vest underneath. Pinned directly to the center of the dark vest was a gleaming silver Federal Bureau of Investigation badge. "She did not miss anything, Mr. Washington." The undercover federal agent stated, his voice a booming echo of lethal authority that froze Jamal completely in his tracks. "Your sister successfully tracked your encrypted blockchain transfers over an hour ago. She intentionally allowed you to book this charter flight specifically so we would know exactly where to intercept you when you finally decided to run." The heavy black duffel bag slipped from Jamal's trembling fingers, hitting the metal stairs with a dull thud. He slowly turned his head, looking back down the runway toward the dark tree line. Out of the shadows, 6 dark armored federal transport vehicles suddenly flipped on their blinding red and blue strobe lights, illuminating the entire airstrip in a terrifying sea of flashing colors. Heavily armed tactical teams poured out of the vehicles, weapons drawn and shouting commands over loud bullhorns. Jamal raised his hands slowly into the cold night air, his knees buckling slightly as the reality of his total destruction finally crushed the last remaining ounce of his arrogant pride. The federal agent grabbed Jamal's shoulder and spun him around, shoving him face first against the side of the luxury jet. The sharp metallic sound of heavy steel handcuffs ratcheting tightly around my brother's wrists echoed clearly through my earpiece. I reached forward and terminated the audio feed, closing the airstrip surveillance window on my laptop. The escape plan had failed perfectly. There was absolutely nowhere left for him to run. The secure connection to the municipal airstrip severed with a soft digital hum, leaving my laptop screen completely black. I sat in the quiet, dim light of the intensive care corridor, letting the profound weight of my brother's federal arrest wash over me. Jamal was currently sitting in the back of an armored transport vehicle, heading straight to a federal holding cell, while his wealthy white wife was being processed in a separate facility for assaulting a federal agent. The massive, fraudulent charity empire they had built, using my sick daughter's name, was officially dismantled. I closed my heavy military-grade encrypted terminal and slid it carefully back into my worn-out canvas tote bag. The quiet, steady beeping of Layla's heart monitor drifted softly through the heavy glass door behind me. She was sleeping peacefully, entirely unaware of the massive financial war I had just waged and won on her behalf. Before I could even stand up to check her vital signs, my personal cell phone began vibrating violently against the cold metal tray table. The screen lit up, illuminating the dark hallway with a glaring notification. It was a continuous stream of text messages from my mother, Valerie. She was still somewhere inside the hospital, likely hiding down in the main lobby after Jamal had violently shoved her to the ground and abandoned her to save himself. Her elite social universe had collapsed around her in a matter of minutes. The billionaire donors from the grand ballroom were undoubtedly blowing up her phone, demanding to know why their massive financial contributions were suddenly frozen and why her golden boy son was currently trending on the local police scanners. Valerie had lost her pristine high society reputation, her unlimited offshore credit cards, and her incredibly fake philanthropic standing all in one single devastating night. I stared at the glowing screen of my phone, watching the long blocks of text pour in one after another. Valerie was not texting to ask if I was okay. She was not checking to see if her 7-year-old granddaughter was experiencing any post-surgical complications or physical pain. Her messages were dripping with pure, unadulterated venom and desperate cornered panic. "You have completely destroyed this family, Maya." She typed her words conveying a deeply toxic and aggressive hatred. "You are a miserable, jealous failure, and you just ruined the greatest legacy the Washington name has ever built. All my wealthy friends at the country club are calling me, treating me like a common criminal because of your pathetic little computer stunts. You are going to fix this immediately, or I swear I will ruin your entire life. I will call every single local news station and tabloid magazine in Atlanta, and I will tell them you are an incredibly unfit mother. I will tell the press that you neglected Layla and refused to pay for her medical care, forcing your successful brother to step in and save her. I will make sure the state takes your child away from you forever." I read her horrific threats over and over again, feeling a strange sense of absolute clarity settle deep into my bones. There was no lingering trace of maternal love left in Valerie's cold, empty heart. Her text messages proved beyond any shadow of a doubt that she felt absolutely zero remorse for using my dying child as a convenient marketing prop. She did not care that Layla's chest had been cracked open by a specialized surgeon just hours ago. She only cared that she could no longer walk into her exclusive country club wearing $15,000 diamond earrings bought with stolen pediatric funds. She was perfectly willing to destroy her own daughter's life and traumatize her recovering granddaughter just to salvage a tiny shred of her fake elite status. She wanted to control the public narrative and paint herself as the tragic victim of a jealous, uneducated single mother. I imagined Valerie sitting on a cheap vinyl chair in the hospital lobby, frantically typing these threats with her shaking, manicured hands. She was probably watching the push notifications roll in from her luxury lifestyle managers, informing her that her accounts were locked and her memberships were indefinitely suspended. The women she had spent decades trying to impress were now actively shunning her. Instead of reflecting on her own massive failures as a mother, she instinctively aimed all her bitter fury at the easiest target she could find. She needed a scapegoat to carry the blame for the catastrophic downfall of her golden child. She actually thought a hollow threat about calling Child Protective Services would force me to magically unlock an international money laundering seizure. I picked up my phone and held it in my hands, feeling the smooth glass beneath my fingertips. Years ago, a threat like this would have terrified me. I would have begged her to listen to reason, and I would have cried over the unfairness of her relentless psychological abuse. I would have panicked at the mere thought of someone taking my beautiful daughter away from me based on a matrix of vicious lies. But the woman sitting in this hospital corridor tonight was not the scared college dropout she thought I was. I was a senior forensic auditor who had just single-handedly dismantled a multi-million-dollar international money laundering syndicate without breaking a single drop of sweat. Valerie's threats of going to the local tabloids were completely laughable compared to the massive federal indictments currently being typed up at the Department of Justice. She thought she still had the upper hand because she believed the world still viewed her as a wealthy, untouchable matriarch. She did not realize that the entire city of Atlanta was about to witness her complete and total humiliation on an unprecedented scale. I looked through the glass window at my precious little girl, resting safely under the soft hospital blankets. Layla was the only family I actually needed. She was strong, resilient, and fighting for her future with a quiet dignity that Valerie could never possibly comprehend. The contrast between my brave daughter recovering from open heart surgery and my cowardly mother sending toxic blackmail texts from a lobby chair was absolutely staggering. My family had viewed my quiet nature as extreme weakness. They had mistaken my strategic silence for submission, allowing their towering arrogance to blind them to the lethal federal authority I was actively wielding right beneath their noses. I slowly began to type my response, making sure every single keystroke was deliberate and perfectly calm. I did not argue with her ridiculous claims about being an unfit mother. I did not try to defend my personal choices or explain the severe federal consequences she was about to face when the agents finished processing her son's seized assets. I simply looked at the digital clock glowing in the top right corner of my phone screen. The bright white numbers read exactly 10:50 in the evening. The local evening news broadcast was scheduled to begin in exactly 10 minutes. The major news stations had already received the anonymous federal press release I had compiled earlier, containing the undeniable proof of the massive charity fraud, the deeply racist text messages from Heather, and the live surveillance footage of the simultaneous federal raids at the gala and the municipal airstrip. Valerie was actively demanding that I fix the problem she helped create. She wanted me to wave a magic wand and restore the fraudulent wealth that allowed her to look down on the rest of the world. She wanted to maintain the absolute lie that she was better than me. I did not need to scream at my mother or engage in a useless, toxic shouting match over a text message thread. I did not need to prove my immense value to a woman who was functionally blind to reality. I just needed her to sit quietly in that hospital lobby and watch her own fabricated empire burn down to ash on a public broadcasting network. I hit the send button, delivering my final devastating message to the woman who had spent my entire life making me feel like absolute garbage. The message was incredibly short, and it left absolutely zero room for negotiation, debate, or argument. Turn on Channel 5 at 11. I locked my phone screen, dropping the device back into my faded gray hoodie pocket. I stood up from the hard plastic chair and walked quietly back into my daughter's hospital room, completely leaving my mother to face the horrifying reality of her new destroyed existence alone. I walked quietly back into my daughter's hospital room, letting the heavy wooden door swing shut behind me and completely blocking out the empty hallway. Layla was still sleeping peacefully, the steady rhythmic hum of her heart monitor providing a comforting soundtrack to the silent room. I reached out and gently brushed a stray curl away from her forehead, feeling a profound sense of absolute peace wash over my entire body. I picked up the television remote resting on the plastic bedside table and aimed it at the small monitor mounted high on the sterile painted wall. I turned the power on and immediately muted the volume completely, ensuring the sudden noise would not disturb my beautiful recovering child. I did not need to hear the actual audio to know exactly what was about to happen. I knew that exactly 4 floors beneath me, my mother Valerie was sitting alone in the main hospital lobby, where a massive flat-screen television was permanently tuned to the local news broadcasting network. I watched the digital clock in the corner of the screen tick forward, changing from 10:59 to exactly 11 in the evening. The standard, late-night commercial programming abruptly vanished, replaced by a glaring red and white graphic, flashing the words "breaking news" across the entire screen. A prominent local news anchor appeared sitting behind a polished desk, looking incredibly stern and deeply serious. Behind him, a split-screen graphic displayed 2 separate live video feeds that instantly shattered the pristine fake reality my family had spent decades constructing. One feed showed the flashing red and blue strobe lights of dozens of heavily armored federal vehicles completely surrounding the prestigious downtown Plaza Hotel. The second feed displayed the dark municipal airstrip where my brother Jamal was currently being manhandled by federal agents against the side of a luxury private jet. I stood perfectly still watching the silent broadcast unfold, knowing that Valerie was staring up at the exact same horrifying images in the empty lobby downstairs. The news anchor began speaking, and though his voice was muted in my room, I knew the precise details he was delivering to millions of viewers across the state. He was announcing the absolute biggest charity fraud bust of the entire decade. The broadcast cut to shaky cell phone footage taken from inside the grand ballroom just moments ago. The footage showed the furious elite billionaires screaming and shoving their way toward the chained doors, while the massive projector screen above the stage displayed Jamal's highly illegal offshore banking ledger. The anchor explicitly detailed how the lavish, extravagant gala was nothing more than a sophisticated front for a massive international money laundering syndicate. The camera panned across the chaotic ballroom, highlighting the sheer outrage of the wealthy political donors and elite business moguls who realized they had been completely scammed. The news broadcast did not hold anything back. The anchor mercilessly stripped away the fake philanthropic black excellence legacy that Valerie had worshipped above her own flesh and blood. The reporter explained in brutal graphic detail how the charity founders had actively preyed upon the generosity of the public by using a critically ill 7-year-old child as a convenient emotional prop. The broadcast explicitly stated that the founders had claimed to be personally funding the child's life-saving open-heart surgery while actively neglecting her and leaving her struggling mother to face the crushing medical debt completely alone. I watched the screen switch to a sleek graphic breaking down where the stolen donor money had actually gone. The anchor described how the funds meant for pediatric care and inner-city youth programs were instead wired directly to illegal high-stakes gambling rings in the Bahamas. The broadcast listed the luxury vehicles, the designer wardrobes, the $15,000 emerald gowns, and the fake country club memberships, all purchased with money stolen from sick children. The pristine, untouchable social universe Valerie had desperately tried to protect was being publicly annihilated on live television. Every single wealthy friend she had, every elite country club member she had tried to impress, and every politician she had bribed were currently watching her entire family be exposed as pathetic, greedy thieves. The news feed transitioned back to the live helicopter footage hovering over the municipal airstrip. The incredibly high-definition camera zoomed in tightly on Jamal's face. The entire city watched as the self-proclaimed golden child of the Washington family was stripped of his dignity. His custom-tailored velvet tuxedo was ripped and ruined, his posture completely slumped in absolute defeat. The undercover federal pilot who had foiled his pathetic escape plan was shown reading him his rights while another agent secured the heavy steel handcuffs around his wrists. The anchor highlighted Jamal's cowardly and desperate attempt to abandon his wife at the hospital and flee the country using hidden cryptocurrency wallets, proving to the entire world that he cared about absolutely no one but himself. Down in the hospital lobby, Valerie was undoubtedly watching her golden boy being paraded across the screen like a common, desperate fugitive. She was watching the total evaporation of her wealth, her status, and her false superiority. She had spent 35 years telling me I was a miserable, ugly failure who would never amount to anything. She had willingly sacrificed her basic humanity and her relationship with her only daughter just to maintain the illusion of elite grandeur. Now that grand illusion was completely shattered, leaving her with absolutely nothing but the crushing reality of her own toxic choices. She could not blame this massive public destruction on anyone else. She could not gaslight the federal government or manipulate the evening news cycle. She was completely and utterly trapped in the devastating consequences of her own horrific actions. The news anchor suddenly shuffled his papers and looked directly into the center of the camera lens, his expression shifting to convey a brand new, shocking revelation. The screen behind him changed to display a massive generic federal seal alongside a staggering numerical figure. The anchor announced that this highly sophisticated international charity bust did not originate from a standard local police investigation or a typical Internal Revenue Service audit. The news reporter explained that the entire federal operation, the coordinated raids, the intercepted cryptocurrency transfers, and the flawless execution of the offshore asset freezes had been meticulously orchestrated entirely in the shadows. The broadcast revealed that the local authorities had essentially been handed the entire criminal case on a silver platter by a rogue, highly classified financial operative. The anchor stated that this invisible ghost auditor, known to the federal agencies only by the initials MW, had spent months quietly dismantling the Washington family empire from the inside out. The reporter paused for dramatic effect, letting the absolute magnitude of the situation sink into the minds of the millions of viewers watching at home. The anchor then delivered the final devastating blow to whatever tiny shred of hope Valerie had left. He announced with absolute awe that the entire bust was orchestrated by a ghost auditor known only as MW, who has just frozen $150 million in stolen assets. The television screen in my daughter's hospital room flickered brightly as the local news broadcast transitioned from the staggering financial graphs back to the chaotic live footage. The split screen vanished completely, replaced by a full high-definition camera feed originating directly from the grand entrance of the downtown Plaza Hotel. Dozens of flashing red and blue lights painted the luxury building in a harsh, terrifying, and rhythmic glare. Heavily armed federal agents were actively marching out of the towering brass doors, pushing two incredibly familiar figures through the dense crowd of frantic, scrambling billionaires. Heather was the very first one shoved aggressively into the harsh, blinding glare of the media cameras. Her $15,000 emerald gown was completely ruined, torn violently at the shoulder, and severely stained with spilled alcohol from the massive riot that had erupted inside the ballroom. Her hands were secured tightly behind her back, with heavy steel handcuffs locking her wrists together over her expensive imported silk sleeves. The contrast between her elegant designer wardrobe and the cold, brutal reality of federal restraints was absolutely stunning to witness. The pristine white savior illusion she had proudly paraded around all evening was permanently shattered into a million unrecoverable pieces. Heather thrashed aggressively against the firm iron grip of the two large federal agents escorting her forcefully down the concrete steps. She threw her head back, her tangled blonde hair whipping wildly around her face as she screamed directly into the surrounding microphones and cameras. "You cannot do this to me!" she shrieked, her voice cracking with pure unhinged hysteria and absolute toxic entitlement. "My father is a highly influential state senator, and I am officially invoking full diplomatic immunity. I demand that you release my hands right now before I personally have every single one of you fired and thrown into a federal prison." The agents did not even pause their relentless forward momentum. They simply ignored her deeply delusional elite threats, treating her exactly like the common, desperate fraudster she had always been. The news cameras zoomed in tightly, capturing every single ugly detail of her aggressive white privilege, colliding head-on with unforgiving federal law enforcement. She looked absolutely pathetic, begging for her wealthy father to save her from a situation she entirely created herself. Right behind her, my brother Jamal was being literally dragged out of the hotel lobby. The handsome, arrogant billionaire philanthropist persona had evaporated entirely, leaving behind a broken, pathetic shell of a man. His custom velvet tuxedo was soaked through with nervous sweat, and his expensive designer shoes aggressively scuffed against the hard pavement as his knees repeatedly buckled beneath him. He was openly weeping, massive tears streaming down his terrified face as he desperately looked around the angry crowd of former friends and elite donors. None of them offered him a single ounce of sympathy or help. Jamal cried out for his massive legal team, his voice reduced to a pathetic whimpering mess that was broadcast directly into millions of living rooms across the state. "I need my attorney," he sobbed loudly, tripping over his own feet as a federal agent caught him roughly by the collar to keep him from falling flat on his face. "You have to call my lawyers right now because there has been a massive, unbelievable mistake. I am the beloved face of this entire community, and I am actively saving sick little children." The utter hypocrisy of his disgusting words made me physically sick, but the federal agent simply shoved his head down and forced his trembling body into the dark back of a heavily armored transport vehicle. His fake black excellence legacy was dead and buried. 4 floors below, my quiet hospital room. The harsh reality of the live broadcast was actively destroying my mother piece by piece. The hospital lobby security cameras, which I had easily accessed on a secondary monitor on my encrypted laptop, showed Valerie standing absolutely frozen in front of the public television screen. Her heavy diamond earrings sparkled brightly under the harsh fluorescent medical lights, looking completely ridiculous against her current state of pure, unadulterated terror. As she watched her golden child being violently shoved into the back of a police van, Valerie's weak legs finally gave out completely. She dropped heavily to her knees on the hard, cold linoleum floor, clutching her expensive designer handbag tightly to her heaving chest. She tilted her head back and let out a devastating guttural scream that instantly startled the nearby hospital receptionists and late-night security guards. Her entire elite social universe had just been publicly executed on live television, and she was entirely powerless to stop the massive financial bleeding. The mother who had always called me a massive disappointment was currently sobbing uncontrollably on a dirty hospital floor, completely stripped of her immense pride. Valerie's personal cell phone began lighting up repeatedly in her trembling hands, but the incoming notifications were definitely not messages of comfort or emotional support. I watched the live social media feeds actively updating in real time on the news broadcast scrolling ticker at the bottom of the television screen. The exact same wealthy elite society that had proudly kissed the ground Valerie walked on just an hour ago was now actively tearing her family apart on the internet with zero mercy. Prominent local politicians who had frequently dined at my mother's luxury house tweeted their absolute disgust, claiming they were completely and utterly deceived by the criminal Washington family. Wealthy country club members posted aggressive public statements disavowing any connection to Valerie, demanding she be immediately and permanently banned from their elite social circles. The high society friends she had spent 35 years cultivating and prioritizing over her own flesh and blood completely abandoned her, the absolute second her fraudulent wealth was federally seized. She was instantly and permanently erased from the elite world she had worshipped her entire miserable life. The swift, brutal nature of the high society excommunication was exactly what she absolutely deserved for selling her soul to look wealthy. The news broadcast suddenly cut back to the chaotic scene outside the downtown hotel, just as the federal agents were preparing to close the heavy steel doors of the transport van. A daring local reporter managed to push his way past the yellow police barricade, shoving a bright yellow microphone directly into Jamal's weeping, terrified face. The reporter did not ask about the stolen charity funds or the illegal offshore gambling rings currently being raided in the Bahamas. The reporter looked directly into my brother's terrified, bloodshot eyes and asked the one single question that would absolutely haunt him for the rest of his miserable, pathetic life inside a federal penitentiary. Mr. Washington, the reporter, shouted loudly over the blaring police sirens, his voice carrying clearly and perfectly through the television speakers. "Do you have a message for your sister? The senior federal auditor, who just authorized your arrest and completely froze your entire financial empire." The flashing red and blue lights illuminated Jamal's terrified face for one final moment before the heavy steel doors of the federal transport van slammed completely shut. He did not have an answer for the reporter shouting about the ghost auditor who had just authorized his arrest. He was entirely speechless, his arrogant tongue finally tied by the devastating reality of his massive criminal exposure. I sat in the quiet, dim light of the pediatric cardiology room, watching the live broadcast on the mounted wall television. Layla continued to sleep peacefully beside me, completely insulated from the absolute destruction of her toxic relatives. The camera feed on the screen shifted away from the chaotic street outside the downtown hotel and cut directly back to the polished news anchor sitting behind the studio desk. The anchor pressed a hand to his earpiece, looking visibly stunned as breaking information was fed directly into his audio receiver. The anchor looked straight into the camera lens and announced that the massive charity fraud bust was no longer the only breaking headline of the evening. He held up a freshly printed bulletin and stated that an unprecedented financial development had just occurred right here in the city of Atlanta. While Jamal and Heather were actively using a sick child to line their own offshore pockets, the mysterious federal auditor who initiated the raid had executed a completely different kind of financial transaction. The anchor revealed that exactly 3 minutes ago, a highly secure and fully verified wire transfer of $50 million was deposited directly into the main operating account of the Atlanta Memorial Hospital. The news reporter explained in absolute awe that the massive anonymous donation was specifically earmarked to completely eradicate the outstanding medical debt for the entire pediatric intensive care unit. I leaned back in my hard plastic hospital chair and watched the beautiful reality of my actions broadcast to millions of viewers. The $50 million was entirely my own money, safely accumulated through years of high-level consulting and classified federal contract bonuses. I did not need to steal from sick children or parade around on a flashy red carpet in a $15,000 gown to prove my worth to society. I simply saw a broken medical system crushing hundreds of innocent families, and I quietly paid the bill. The news anchor explained that because of this massive, unexpected donation, over 300 struggling parents would wake up tomorrow morning to find their crushing financial burdens completely wiped clean. They would no longer have to choose between buying groceries and keeping their critically ill children alive. This was actual community uplift functioning in total silence and absolute grace. It was the exact opposite of the vile performative fake charity my brother and sister-in-law had used to mask their disgusting greed. 4 floors below my quiet room, the hospital lobby television blared the exact same news broadcast. I turned my attention back to the encrypted security feed on my military laptop screen, watching my mother Valerie as she stared up at the glowing monitor. She was still sitting in a pathetic heap on the cold linoleum floor, her expensive velvet wrap pooling in the dirt around her trembling knees. The investigative reporter standing outside the locked hotel ballroom suddenly came back onto the split screen with a major update. The reporter stated that independent financial journalists had just confirmed the specific identity of the anonymous donor. The broadcast explicitly declared that the $50 million came directly from a brilliant self-made federal executive who also happened to be the biological sister of the arrested charity fraudster. The reporter emphasized that this highly educated and deeply successful woman was the very same single mother that Jamal had publicly claimed was a penniless, uneducated burden on their elite family. Valerie stopped crying and went completely rigid. Her jaw dropped open in pure, unadulterated horror as the devastating pieces of the puzzle finally slammed together in her panicked brain. She had spent 35 years worshiping a degenerate thief while actively punishing and degrading the only person in her family who possessed true elite wealth and actual world-changing power. Valerie remembered standing in my hospital room just an hour ago, throwing a pathetic $50,000 check in my face and demanding that I fix the computer glitch. She had called me a miserable, jealous failure and ordered me to bow down to her golden son. Now she realized with absolute crushing certainty that she had been screaming at a silent billionaire-level operative. The daughter she had banished from her pristine country club, social circles was actually a lethal financial titan who could buy and sell her entire fake empire 10 times over before breakfast. The sheer magnitude of her humiliating miscalculation completely shattered her fragile mind, leaving her violently sobbing into her hands, with zero hope of ever recovering her shattered dignity. I felt absolutely no pity for the broken woman weeping in the lobby. She had made her toxic choices and now she was choking on the bitter ashes of her own manufactured reality. I tapped a key on my federal terminal and switched the surveillance feed away from Valerie's pathetic display. I brought up a grid of security cameras covering the main ground floor exits of the massive hospital complex. There was still one more loose end that needed to be permanently tied up before the night was completely over. My deadbeat ex-husband DeAndre had been hiding somewhere inside the building ever since his sleazy lawyer sprinted down the emergency stairwell in absolute terror. DeAndre had seen the horrifying satellite photos of his illegal gambling syndicate, and he knew the federal agents were actively raiding his criminal associates in the Bahamas. The security camera mounted near the hospital cafeteria showed DeAndre creeping nervously along the painted wall. His cheap gray suit was wrinkled and stained with nervous sweat. He kept looking over his shoulder, terrified that the undercover agents who took down Heather were coming for him next. He pulled his collar up around his neck and ducked his head low, trying to blend in with a small group of exhausted night shift nurses walking toward the front lobby. DeAndre watched the glowing television screens above the reception desk, displaying Jamal's humiliating arrest. He realized instantly that the $20,000 bribe he received to steal medical custody of Layla was completely gone frozen forever in the federal asset seizure. His grand plan to become a wealthy absentee father had totally backfired, and his only remaining instinct was to run away, like the absolute coward he had always been. DeAndre separated from the group of nurses and moved quickly toward the massive automatic sliding glass doors at the main hospital entrance. He kept his eyes locked on the dark parking lot outside, desperately calculating the fastest route to his beat-up car. He thought he could just slip quietly into the cool night air and disappear into the shadows before anyone realized he was even missing. He reached the exit, and the automatic glass doors slid smoothly open, welcoming him to freedom. DeAndre took one single step out onto the concrete pavement, letting out a shaky breath of relief. But his pathetic escape plan was completely destroyed before his second foot even hit the ground. Two massive figures dressed in dark tactical gear stepped out from behind the concrete pillars flanking the hospital entrance. Heavy, strong hands grabbed DeAndre roughly by the shoulders, stopping his forward momentum instantly and spinning him around to face the bright lights of the lobby. The federal agents did not ask for his identification or read him his rights politely. One of the agents held up a stack of glossy printed satellite photos, clearly showing DeAndre sitting at the illegal offshore poker table, surrounded by wanted cartel members. The second agent grabbed DeAndre's wrists and violently wrenched them behind his back. The sharp, unmistakable click of heavy steel handcuffs locking tightly around his wrists echoed through the cool night air, instantly ending his pathetic attempt to escape his massive federal gambling warrants. 3 days had passed since the blinding red and blue lights of the federal transport vehicles illuminated the grand entrance of the downtown Plaza Hotel. The overwhelming chaos of the charity bust and the frantic screaming of the betrayed billionaires had slowly faded from my immediate reality, replaced entirely by the quiet, peaceful humming of a brand new medical environment. I was no longer sitting in the cramped, depressing charity ward, listening to the squeaking shoes of overworked nurses and worrying about the mounting stack of unpayable medical debts. My massive anonymous $50 million donation to the hospital had triggered an immediate and profound institutional response from the board of directors. The hospital administrators had personally ensured that my recovering daughter was safely and swiftly transferred to the absolute best pediatric recovery suite the medical facility had to offer. The new room was incredibly spacious, featuring massive floor-to-ceiling windows that let the warm, bright Atlanta sunlight pour directly across the foot of my daughter's plush mechanical bed. The sterile, depressing beige walls of the charity ward were replaced by soothing pastel colors and comfortable, expensive furniture designed to make families feel entirely at home. Layla was finally awake, and the terrifying, heavy breathing tubes had been successfully removed from her delicate throat. The healthy, natural color was slowly returning to her beautiful little cheeks, erasing the pale, fragile ghost that had terrified me just a few nights prior. She was sitting up slightly propped against a mountain of soft white pillows, holding a small stuffed brown bear that the lead cardiovascular surgeon had personally given her that morning. She smiled at me, a genuine bright expression that completely melted away the residual ice that had been flowing through my veins since the red carpet gala. We were playing a quiet, simple game of Uno on her rolling plastic tray table, completely insulated from the devastating financial war I had waged and won on her behalf. The world outside this hospital room was actively tearing my former family to absolute shreds. But inside these four walls, everything was finally safe and perfectly calm. The absolute tranquility of our morning was suddenly interrupted by the harsh, vibrating buzz of my personal cell phone resting on the nearby windowsill. I glanced at the glowing digital screen, fully expecting to see a routine status update from my forensic accounting team regarding the ongoing liquidation of Jamal's seized luxury vehicles and offshore assets. Instead, the caller identification simply displayed a long sequence of unknown generic numbers indicating a routed call from an institutional facility. I excused myself softly, kissing Layla's warm forehead, before stepping quietly out into the private carpeted hallway to answer the incoming transmission. I pressed the green accept button and raised the smooth glass device to my ear. A rigid, automated robotic voice filled the tiny speaker, informing me that I was receiving a collect call from an inmate currently residing at the United States Federal Penitentiary in Atlanta. The automated system instructed me to press the number 1 on my keypad to accept the federal charges. I felt a cold, deeply satisfied smile spread across my face. Jamal was actually desperate enough to call the very same senior federal auditor who had personally locked him inside a concrete cage. I pressed the button fully prepared to listen to my arrogant brother grovel and beg for a miraculous plea deal that he was never going to get. But the voice that came through the heavy static of the receiver was not deep or aggressive or arrogant. It was the high-pitched, frantic sobbing of a woman who had completely lost her grip on reality. "Maya, please do not hang up the phone." My mother. Valerie wept into the receiver, her words stumbling over each other in a pathetic, breathless rush. The elite, sophisticated tone she had meticulously polished for 35 years was entirely gone, replaced by the raw, terrified begging of a completely broken woman. "I am sitting in the visitor center at the federal detention facility, and Jamal's lawyer managed to patch this call through to your number." Valerie cried, her voice cracking with pure, unadulterated panic. "You have to listen to me, Maya. You have to fix this absolute nightmare right now." Valerie continued sobbing loudly, blowing her nose heavily into the receiver, without a single ounce of her precious high society grace. "The federal prosecutors are absolutely destroying your brother in there. They denied his bail entirely because the judge considers him a massive flight risk after that stupid stunt he pulled at the municipal airstrip with the private jet. His public defender told me he is facing decades in a maximum security prison because of the wire fraud charges. You have to sell your assets." Maya, Valerie demanded, her voice suddenly taking on a familiar toxic edge of unearned authority, despite her completely ruined circumstances. "The news reporter on the television said you have $50 million just sitting around in your personal accounts. You have to liquidate your investment portfolio and wire the money to the federal court to secure your brother's immediate release. We can hire an elite defense team and spin this entire situation as a massive accounting error made by his stupid white wife. You can go to your bosses at the federal agency and tell them you made a massive mistake when you audited his charity. You can tell them the money was completely legitimate and save our family from this horrific public embarrassment." I leaned back against the painted wall of the quiet hospital corridor, letting her ridiculous delusional demands wash over me without feeling a single shred of guilt or familial obligation. Valerie was truly living in a completely fabricated reality. If she thought I would ever commit federal perjury or spend a single penny of my hard-earned wealth to rescue the monster who stole from sick children. When I did not immediately respond to her insane demands, Valerie shifted her desperate tactics, diving straight into the heavy emotional manipulation she had used to control our family for decades. "Maya, he is your brother," Valerie cried, her voice breaking with manufactured maternal grief as she tried to force me into submission. "He is your own flesh and blood, and you are doing this to him out of pure spite. You cannot just abandon your family when we are facing total destruction." All of my wealthy friends at the country club have completely blocked my phone number, and Heather's racist family released a public statement disowning us entirely. We share the exact same last name, and we are supposed to protect each other from the harsh outside world. You cannot let them lock your own brother in a cold concrete cage like an animal while you sit in a luxury hospital suite hoarding millions of dollars. You have to remember where you came from, Maya. You have to protect your blood because family is the only thing that truly matters in this life. I listened to her pathetic attempts to invoke a family loyalty that she had actively destroyed the very second she realized Layla needed open-heart surgery. She did not ask how Layla was doing today. She did not show a single moment of genuine remorse for using my daughter's severe medical trauma to fund her emerald dresses and exclusive country club memberships. She only cared that her fake elite status was gone, and she was willing to drag me down to federal prison right alongside Jamal just to get it back. I pulled the phone away from my ear for a brief second, tapping the glass screen to open my archived text message threads. I scrolled quickly through the inbox until I found the exact conversation from 3 nights ago. I brought the phone back to my mouth, my voice perfectly steady and dripping with absolute lethal authority. "I am looking at a text message you sent me exactly 72 hours ago." Valerie, I stated coldly, cutting through her hysterical sobbing with surgical precision. "You were sitting at a glamorous red carpet event, drinking expensive imported champagne, while my daughter was fighting to survive a massive surgical procedure. I told you she was asking for her grandmother, and you typed exactly 8 words back to me. I took a slow, deep breath, reading the devastating text message aloud to the very woman who wrote it. She lived stop making her our problem. Valerie went completely silent on the other end of the line, the horrifying weight of her own cruel words suffocating her desperate pleas. The static of the prison phone system buzzed quietly, filling the empty space where her arrogant pride used to live. I did not give her a chance to offer another pathetic excuse or invent another toxic lie. Jamal's 20-year federal prison sentence is not my problem, I whispered softly, ensuring every single syllable was perfectly clear. I pulled the phone away from my face, pressed the red button to terminate the active connection, and permanently blocked the number from ever reaching my device again. The harsh fluorescent lights of the federal courthouse in downtown Atlanta buzzed with a sickening mechanical hum bouncing off the solid oak paneling of the massive courtroom. Heather sat perfectly still at the heavy wooden defense table, staring blankly at the deeply scratched surface in front of her. She was no longer wearing her $15,000 emerald gowns or her imported silk wraps. She was dressed in a standard-issue bright orange federal jumpsuit that hung loosely off her trembling shoulders. Her cascading blonde waves were flat and greasy, clinging to the sides of her pale, exhausted face. There was no army of elite corporate defense attorneys sitting beside her. There were no high-priced political fixers ready to make her massive federal charges quietly disappear into the night. The only person sitting next to the former philanthropic queen of Atlanta was a deeply overworked and visibly exhausted public defender who kept nervously checking his cheap plastic wristwatch. The heavy mahogany doors at the back of the courtroom swung open, and a tall man wearing a sharp charcoal suit walked directly down the center aisle. Heather gasped, her sunken eyes suddenly lighting up with a massive surge of desperate hope. It was her father's chief political strategist, a man who had spent decades burying family scandals to protect the wealthy White dynasty. Heather leaned forward, her handcuffs clinking against the wooden table, fully expecting him to hand the public defender a stack of elite bail documents and secure her immediate release. The strategist did not even look at her face. He walked right up to the small wooden divider separating the gallery from the defense tables and silently placed a single folded piece of heavy cardstock on the ledge. He turned around and walked straight back out of the courtroom without speaking a single syllable. Heather grabbed the folded paper with her shaking hands and ripped it open. It was a formal typed letter bearing the official seal of her father's state senate office. The words printed on the page were cold, clinical, and absolutely devastating. The letter explicitly stated that her elite family was permanently and entirely cutting ties with her to protect their upcoming political re-election campaigns. Her father wrote that her highly publicized arrest and the massive charity fraud scandal had brought catastrophic shame to their pristine political legacy. He formally disowned her, declaring that her massive trust fund was completely dissolved and that nobody from the family would be attending her federal hearings or offering a single dime for her legal defense. Heather dropped the heavy paper onto the floor, her mouth opening in a silent scream as the absolute core of her wealthy white privilege was violently ripped away, leaving her totally abandoned to face the federal justice system alone. The sharp crack of a wooden gavel echoing through the massive room forced Heather to snap her head toward the front of the court. The federal judge, a stern, highly respected black woman with decades of experience on the bench, took her seat behind the towering mahogany podium. Heather immediately jumped to her feet, completely ignoring the frantic warnings of her public defender, who tried to pull her back down by her orange sleeve. "Your Honor!" Heather cried out, her voice pitching up into a desperate, hysterical whine as she attempted to deploy the exact same fake white tears she used to manipulate her billionaire donors. "You have to understand that I am a complete victim in this horrific situation. I am just a good, generous person who married into a deeply toxic and criminal family. My husband Jamal manipulated my kind heart and used my pure intentions to uplift the black community for his own disgusting financial gain. I had absolutely no idea he was stealing from sick children, and I should be granted immediate immunity for my total cooperation." The federal judge did not show a single ounce of sympathy for the weeping woman standing in the orange jumpsuit. She simply adjusted her reading glasses and picked up a thick stack of printed documents resting on her podium. She looked down at Heather with an expression of absolute disgust and pure judicial authority. Mrs. Washington, the judge stated, her booming voice cutting through Heather's pathetic sobbing like a razor-sharp knife. You are not a victim of manipulation, and you are certainly not a savior to the Black community. You are a willing and active participant in a massive international money laundering syndicate, and I am going to make sure the official court record reflects exactly who you truly are behind closed doors. The judge held up the printed documents, revealing them to be the certified transcripts of the remote data extraction performed on Heather's personal cell phone. The entire courtroom fell dead silent as the judge began reading the intercepted text messages out loud into the federal microphone. The judge read the exact conversations where Heather explicitly bragged to her wealthy white friends about using a critically ill 7-year-old Black girl as a highly profitable marketing prop. She read the messages where Heather called the prominent Black donors pathetic diversity hires who were too stupid to realize she was taking their money to buy luxury ski chalets in Aspen. The judge methodically read every single vicious racist microaggression Heather had ever typed, exposing her deep-seated hatred for the very same minority community she publicly claimed to be elevating. The brutal public exposure of her true nature completely broke whatever fragile sanity Heather had left. She started screaming at the top of her lungs, her voice cracking with wild, unhinged fury. She pounded her handcuffed fists against the heavy wooden defense table, fighting against her public defender, who was desperately trying to restrain her. Those messages are entirely fake, Heather shrieked, thrashing her body wildly side to side as the court bailiffs began moving toward her table. You are all just jealous of my family and my wealth. You are trying to frame me because you hate that a successful white woman was doing more for your pathetic community than you ever could. I am a good person, and I demand that my father be called into this courtroom right now to shut this entire circus down. The judge slammed her wooden gavel down 3 times in rapid succession, the sharp explosive sounds echoing like gunshots across the room. Your father is currently under federal indictment for illegal campaign bribery, and you are facing 20 years in a maximum security penitentiary, the judge roared, commanding absolute silence. You have zero political leverage left in this city, and your pathetic attempts to play the innocent victim are officially over. The bailiffs grabbed Heather's arms, forcefully pinning her trembling body back down into the hard wooden chair. She was hyperventilating, gasping for air, as her entire manufactured reality crashed down into complete ruin. Heather whipped her head around, looking desperately past the wooden divider and into the crowded public gallery. She was searching wildly for a friendly face, for a wealthy country club associate, or a former political ally who would stand up and defend her pristine honor. She scanned the rows of wooden benches, hoping to find anyone who would look at her with sympathy instead of absolute disgust. Her frantic, searching eyes suddenly stopped dead, locking onto a single solitary figure sitting quietly in the very back row of the massive federal courtroom. I sat perfectly still in the dim lighting of the gallery, completely insulated from the chaotic screaming and the heavy gavel strikes. I was not wearing a faded gray college hoodie or worn-out sneakers. I was wearing a sharp, custom-tailored charcoal designer suit that radiated pure, lethal authority. My posture was relaxed, but incredibly powerful as I maintained absolute, unbroken eye contact with the terrified woman who had threatened to steal my child just a few days ago. Heather stared at me, her jaw trembling violently as she noticed the heavy gold shield resting in my hands. I slowly raised my official Federal Securities and Exchange Commission badge, letting the polished metal catch the bright courtroom lights for her to see clearly. I did not say a single word to her. I did not need to shout or scream to prove my massive superiority. I simply looked at the broken racist fraudster sitting in an orange jumpsuit and gave her a cold, utterly victorious smile. 6 months had passed since the flashing red and blue lights of the federal transport vehicles faded into the dark Atlanta night. The oppressive sterile smell of the charity ward and the terrifying rhythmic beeping of the intensive care monitors were nothing but distant, fading memories. I stood on the pristine, sunlit steps of the Atlanta Memorial Hospital, feeling the warm Georgia breeze wrap comforting arms around my shoulders. I was no longer wearing a faded gray college hoodie or cheap worn-out sneakers. I wore a razor-sharp, custom-tailored, midnight blue designer suit that commanded absolute respect and radiated a quiet, undeniable power. Standing directly beside me was my beautiful 7-year-old daughter, Layla. She was no longer a fragile, pale ghost, hooked up to complex life support machines and begging for a grandmother who would never come. She was wearing a bright yellow sundress, her dark curls bouncing freely in the wind, and her cheeks flushed with the vibrant glowing color of a completely healthy child. The faint surgical scar resting quietly beneath her collarbone was the only remaining physical evidence of the massive, brutal war we had waged and won together against both her failing heart and my deeply toxic relatives. She held onto my hand with a strong, steady grip, looking out at the massive crowd of hundreds of eager people gathered on the freshly cut hospital lawn. This was not a fake performative gala filled with arrogant billionaires drinking expensive imported champagne and pretending to care about the Black community for social clout. The people standing before us today were dedicated pediatric surgeons, exhausted but smiling night shift nurses, grateful parents whose massive medical debts had been completely wiped clean, and genuine local community leaders who actually did the heavy lifting in our neighborhoods without ever asking for a camera crew. They were gathered around a towering modern brick structure draped in a massive red silk ribbon, waiting patiently for the official dedication ceremony to begin. The hospital board of directors had spared absolutely no expense in transforming my $50 million anonymous donation into a state-of-the-art medical facility designed to save countless innocent lives. Behind the polished wooden podium, an oversized digital display rotated through various local news broadcasts, highlighting the beautiful reality of what we had built. But the scrolling news tickers at the bottom of the screens also told the complete and final story of the toxic empire I had permanently dismantled from the inside out. The local news anchors on the broadcast feeds provided a steady stream of devastating updates regarding the ultimate fate of the fraudulent Washington family. Jamal was no longer wearing custom velvet tuxedos or swiping heavy metal black cards to impress elite real estate moguls in luxury ballrooms. The federal judge had shown him absolutely zero mercy during his heavily publicized trial, sentencing him to 20 solid years in a maximum security federal penitentiary for his central role in the international money laundering syndicate and his massive charity fraud. His fake philanthropic Black excellence legacy was entirely erased from the public record, replaced forever by his new permanent identity as a disgraced federal inmate. Heather had suffered a similarly brutal and highly public downfall in the very same courtroom. Her wealthy, white political family had completely severed all ties with her, dissolving her massive trust fund and leaving her to face the federal justice system entirely alone, without a single high-priced lawyer to defend her actions. The judge had read every single one of her racist microaggressions and toxic text messages into the permanent court record, ensuring she would never again be able to hide behind her fake white savior complex. She was currently serving a 15-year sentence, stripped of her emerald gowns and forced to wear a standard-issue orange jumpsuit for the foreseeable future. But the most pathetic and deeply satisfying downfall belonged entirely to my mother, Valerie. The arrogant woman who had spent 35 years calling me an ugly, miserable failure was now completely bankrupt and entirely discarded by the elite society she had worshipped her entire life. The Internal Revenue Service had aggressively seized every single asset she possessed, including her massive luxury home and her expensive diamond earrings, to help pay down Jamal's massive criminal restitution. The news broadcasts showed brief, humiliating footage of Valerie carrying her meager remaining possessions in cheap plastic trash bags into a run-down roadside motel on the absolute outskirts of the city. The wealthy country club friends she had desperately tried to impress had permanently blocked her phone number and actively crossed the street to avoid making accidental eye contact with her in public. She was completely isolated, trapped in a miserable tiny motel room, with nothing but the crushing, devastating reality of her own toxic choices to keep her company. She had chosen the glittering illusion of wealth over the actual life of her own sick granddaughter, and the universe had rightfully rewarded her with absolute total nothingness. The chief director of the hospital stepped up to the polished wooden podium and tapped the microphone, breaking my focus away from the digital news monitors. He spoke eloquently to the massive crowd about the sheer power of silent charity and the incredible resilience of a mother fighting to protect her child from the harsh, brutal realities of a broken medical system. He turned to Layla with a warm, gentle smile and handed her a massive pair of gleaming golden scissors. The crowd erupted into a deafening roar of genuine applause and joyous cheering as my brave little girl smoothly sliced the heavy silk ribbon in half, letting it fall softly to the concrete pavement below. The large velvet drape covering the side of the new building was instantly pulled away, revealing the shining silver letters permanently mounted to the pristine brick wall. The letters proudly and boldly spelled out, the Layla Washington Pediatric Cardiology Wing, ensuring that my daughter's name would forever be associated with actual healing rather than fake philanthropy. Layla stared up at the massive silver letters bearing her own name, her eyes wide with innocent childhood wonder. She looked out at the sea of smiling, supportive faces, clapping for her survival and celebrating her beautiful new life. She turned her head and looked up at me, her small hand gripping my fingers tightly as the cheering continued to echo across the hospital grounds. She tilted her head slightly, a brief moment of quiet confusion crossing her beautiful, healthy face amidst the massive celebration. "Where is Grandma Layla?" asked her soft voice, barely carrying over the loud, joyous applause of the surrounding crowd. I looked down at my precious daughter, feeling an overwhelming wave of absolute victorious peace settle deeply into my soul. I knelt down slowly so I was perfectly at eye level with her, brushing a soft, dark curl behind her ear. I smiled a warm, steady, and fiercely protective smile, looking directly into her bright, shining eyes. "Family is not blood, baby," I told her, my voice carrying the quiet, lethal strength of a woman who had successfully conquered all her demons. "Family is who stays in the waiting room when you are fighting for your life. The rest is just trash waiting to be audited."